Picture this. You're on top of the world. You have amazing friends, just moved into your own place, and are enjoying parties, good times, and dating, searching for your soulmate. But lurking in the shadows is someone watching you. Someone who will ultimately steal all of your dreams in a single night. Now, let's get into the case for today. The very first person I want to introduce you to is Brooke Elizabeth Baker. Brooke was born on April 24, 1978, to her father Maurice and her mother Janet Baker. Just a year later, her little brother Braun came into this world. Brooke grew up in a very loving family, and with a brother that was like her twin. They were so very close. Even though neither her mom nor her dad went to college, Brooke had an innate passion for learning, and she dreamed of getting out of her little town of Vincennes, Indiana. It's a very small town right across the river, neighboring Illinois, and it's a rural area. It's one of the oldest communities in the state of Indiana. The first Christian churches were founded in this area, and people who either come from it or live there do have those Christian religious values. It was no different for the Baker family. They regularly attended church and believed in God. The town of Vincennes only has about 18,000 residents. But something you don't usually hear in these types of stories is, instead of it being this safe little town where no one expected there to be murder, that wasn't the case in Vincennes. Actually, there was sort of a dark cloud over Knox County. It was a place where a number of murders had gone unsolved, and there was a saying, if you want to murder somebody and get away with it, do it in Knox County. How can it be that in a small town where everyone knows one another and they're so friendly, even to a stranger who comes to town, they're ready to lend a hand? So what brought evil and darkness to this little town? Well, some say it started back in 1911 with what is now known as the Barnyard Murder. It happened on Friday, November 17, 1911, when a very wealthy local farmer was found dead in his barn, one single bullet to the back of his head. Sadly, the perpetrators were his own two sons. Obviously, that crime was solved, and maybe it was that people went stir-crazy in this little town, but there were ones that were left unsolved, like the murder of Lisa So McCracken. She was a young student from Vincennes University who was killed in 1987, or the death of Kathy Westfall in 1995, attacked in her apartment. So what was it that made these crimes so hard to solve? Can we blame it on being a small town? Maybe the police departments are not equipped, the detectives don't know the right procedures and protocols, and don't have enough police power. Or maybe there's just not enough financial backing to solve these crimes. And that's why there's that saying, if you want to commit a murder and get away with it, do it there. This is where the Baker family lived. Brooke and Braun were very close, as I mentioned, almost like twins being just a year apart. So Braun really looked up to his big sister. The Baker family was a low-income family. They had very limited means, but a daughter that dreamed so big, so they tried very hard to support her in any way they possibly could. Brooke had a very active imagination, so it wasn't a surprise when she began writing. Now she was just putting all of those dreams and that imagination to work by putting it onto a page and being able to share it with others. Brooke was adored by her friends and family. She was so sweet and so cheerful. Everywhere she went, she would be smiling and spreading that happiness. One of her best friends, Shauna, knew and admired how enthusiastic she was about everything. She was on top of the world, about wanting to be on top of the world and do big things in life. Shauna and many other people just loved being around Brooke. She was inspiring, especially for a young woman. By high school, she started to write for her high school paper. Now she could share her thoughts, her opinions, and her imagination with so many more. This was a real turning point in Brooke's life because she realized that her dream was to be a journalist. While she was still in high school, she started to research journalism programs at local universities. As a matter of fact, Shauna knew about Brooke before actually knowing Brooke because she would read some of the articles that she had written in their school newspaper. Shauna actually met Brooke because she was so impressed by one of the articles that she had written that she went and told her that it was some of the best writing she had ever read in the high school paper. That really meant a lot to Brooke, She lit up whenever somebody praised her for something that she truly believed was one of her talents. Everyone could see that she was different. She was someone with a lot of big dreams for growing up in such a small town. What really made Brooke stand out is that she was vocal about what she wanted to achieve. And sometimes we do that to put our goals out there, like you're going to almost be kept accountable for them. She wanted to move to New York, and she told her friends she wanted to work for Rolling Stone magazine one day. She was determined, she was going after what she wanted, and there was nothing that was going to stop her. The first thing she wanted was a journalism degree. She wanted to stay somewhat close to home until the timing was right to move on to somewhere bigger and better. Therefore, she applied to Vincennes University, the oldest public college in the state. It was founded in 1801, and it was the perfect school for Brooke because it had a 2-year transfer associate's degree in journalism. It was designed to prepare graduates to transfer to a 4-year program or to start working right away after earning their associate's degree. Even more exciting was the fact that the students that were in the journalism program got to work for the university's award-winning newspaper called the Trailblazer. They were allowed to do this starting their very first semester on campus. The Trailblazer is a student-run multimedia news organization. Well, knowing what you already know about Brooke, you can probably guess she applied, and she was accepted to Vincennes University's journalism program. Her friends and family were beyond excited for her. Even though most of them knew that she would most likely get in, it was still a big deal. But there was still something about the fact that you're from a family where this might not have been possible for your own parents, and they get to live vicariously through you, pushing you, cheering you on, being there for you, and knowing that they created this amazing human being that's going to do really big things in life. When Brooke started college, she wasn't just like a lot of the other students who kind of just slowly go through the motions, trying to figure out what they wanted to do. She knew from the minute she got there what she was going to do, and she didn't waste a second. This wasn't going to be a gradual thing for her. It was like she was going from A to Z and on her way out of that small town and into the big city. Her first step was becoming an editor for the campus newspaper. She knew she was going to have that background and experience in order to use it as a stepping stone to her real passion and career one day. On the very first day that the journalism students got together, they sat in a group to discuss their future dreams. Every person had maybe 2 or 3 dreams that they wanted to accomplish, but Brooke had 25. Some of them were to be a member of the Senate, a congresswoman, and a reporter who would break all kinds of controversial stories. When 2 of the girls in the room, Deborah Davison and Shauna Pearson, heard what Brooke was saying, they were in absolute awe of her because they didn't think all the journalism students combined could take on even one of her dreams and complete it. They thought it would take more than 100. Deborah and Shauna really looked up to her. Brooke got started right away. She wasn't afraid to look like a big deal on campus. She would even have friends coming right into the journalism lab, and it seemed like she was always going somewhere with someone. People didn't know how she was making these friends so quickly, but she would just instantly bond with people. As a matter of fact, Shauna became pretty much her best friend and her partner in crime. They supported each other in the journalism program because support was necessary. You had to work as a team to support your colleagues. That was just a part of what they were learning in their program. Sometimes someone else is going to break a story, but they know that you're the perfect person to tell it, and that's how it worked. But Brooke's biggest support system and cheerleaders were her family and her brother, Braun. Even though she was off to college, her brother was traveling right behind her. So while in her freshman year, Braun would make frequent trips over to Brooke's place, and it was fun because there were a lot of guys that he could bond with. He made a lot of friends even before getting into college, if that was going to be one of his goals. She was setting things up pretty nicely for him, and they truly were best of friends. That's a blessing because you don't always have that kind of relationship with your siblings. But Brooke wasn't just there to be serious. There was another side of her. As serious as she was, Brooke liked to party, and she was very attractive, so it was very easy for her to make friends, especially with boys. She had this very charismatic personality, long flowing golden blonde hair, blue-green eyes, and a smile with these cute little dimples on the sides. And of course, she had enthusiasm in spades. She liked to make friends with everyone, and had a very diverse group of friends. Sometimes, some of her friends would be surprised that she was friends with certain people, because they were so different from her, but that's just the way Brooke was. She wasn't exactly into having just one guy either. That's not really how she worked. She was having fun, casually dating a number of guys, trying to see what she liked and disliked, and especially where she wanted to go romantically. There's nothing wrong with that, especially for a young girl, because this is an important time in your life. She couldn't be bogged down by having a serious relationship, but we will find out that there was this one guy that she was a little more serious with, and that comes later. Right now, it's all about working hard to position herself for success. Brooke definitely got along with guys better than she got along with girls, and I'm sure a lot of the guys she hung out with wanted to be a little more than friends. She felt the same way about several of them too, and it seemed like they were okay with that situation. Just having fun in college, no strings attached. I was thinking maybe because she and her brother were so close in age, she was used to having a guy around, so maybe that's why she liked to make friends with other guys, because it was comfortable for her. She was even living with a guy named Jason. They were living together until she could afford to get her own place. Jason was just one of Brooke's roommates during her first year of college. There were other guys living there as well, and Jason and Brooke were a little more than just roommates from time to time. The home itself had sort of an open-door policy, so to speak. They all shared the common areas, and they would walk around, talk to one another, and bring each other's friends to meet the roommates. College life can be some of the best years of people's lives, where they meet people who are going to be their friends for the rest of their lives. It's just really sad that Brooke wouldn't be in her friends' lives for very long. Remember that I said there was one guy that she was a little bit more serious with? Well, his name is Steve. He's a nice guy, sweet, sensitive, and he seems to be in love with Brooke, or at the very least infatuated. But Brooke is more interested in succeeding in her career than in succeeding in a relationship. She and Steve had an on-again, off-again relationship. By the second semester of her freshman year, she was dead set on working for the school paper. She would spend most of her time just coming up with stories. Finally, she was a regular editor for the Trailblazer, and to think she was only 18 years old. It's kind of mind-blowing how determined she was. The reason I say this is because it's not very common for a new student on campus, especially a freshman, to be in a position like Brooke was. She was already rising to the top when it came to writing for the Trailblazer, and that's the thing that stood out about Brooke. She was always looking for very controversial topics because she knew that those stories were needed for her to stand out and be recognized, especially coming from such a small town. She needed to rock the boat, she needed to ruffle some feathers, and let me tell you, you're going to find out that she did just that. It didn't make everyone happy, of course. People were proud of her when they were close to her, unless they were being talked about by her. That's another story. As much as she was good at making friends, she was also good at making people angry because some people just don't want to be written about. They don't want their business being put in a university newspaper. Even if they don't end up in the newspaper, some people just don't want to be investigated. Brooke had her sights set on not only becoming a journalist but an investigative journalist. Her goal was to be that person making friends with everyone so she could get the scoop. Well, some people didn't think they could trust Brooke. Maybe she was only hanging out with them to get information, and that's not always a very good feeling. I think we've all seen it in movies and TV shows where there's this reporter trying to get close to you, and they're like, "Listen, off the record." And I know you might not be thinking what I'm thinking, but I'm always like, right, off the record, but still in your brain. So there's a way that they can spin that story, and use that information maybe without saying who gave it to them, all the while risking the fact that someone might find out who had loose lips. But this wasn't that serious. Although it was award-winning, the Trailblazer was a newspaper at a university in a small town. So many of the people around Brooke thought it was pretty endearing. They knew that she meant well, that her intentions were to do something good, to uncover injustices, to make things right, to bring things to the surface that may be going on behind the scenes of some of the organizations on campus, and things like that. The newspaper was directly related to what was going on in either the community, the city, the county as a whole, or just the university. The only people who really cared about the Trailblazer were students on campus and possibly the professors. So all of that being said, it didn't really hurt any of Brooke's friendships when she was getting acclimated to being a big part of the newspaper. As a matter of fact, a lot of people just thought she was kind of making a big deal about being a big deal, but that she wasn't that big of a deal. We've heard the saying, "too big for your britches." That's what they thought about Brooke. There were a lot of fellow students who kind of laughed behind her back, thinking that she was just making these stories up, that she really wasn't that great at writing or wasn't going to be someone who did big things. It could have been jealousy, who knows? But she would sort of brag about investigating things. A lot of people just thought she was making it up for clout, to be cool, to be taken more seriously, or to be seen as somebody. Even though you shouldn't do this, some people who work in journalism kind of skew the facts, making things just a little more interesting. I'm not saying Brooke was doing that, but there were some people who thought that she was just so that she could have this captivating story on campus that no one else seemed to know about. And she was working on one. So when she went into her second year in college, there was something that she was dedicated to uncovering. Something happening right under everyone's nose on campus that she thought didn't just make a good story, but could possibly have some legal ramifications if it were true. I'm going to get into that in a moment, because that's a big part of the story. Her dreams, and the way that she was sewing them, could have left her trapped in a web of her own determination by getting herself in a position she couldn't get herself out of. As they say, sometimes you're in too deep. It all started in the spring of 1997 while still in the first year of college. She was investigating something, and no one really knew exactly what was going on. But she had been interviewing several women around campus. There were rumors going around about what exactly Brooke was trying to figure out. Now, when you're hanging out with all guys, you're going to hear things and see things that maybe some ladies wouldn't know about. Maybe you overhear them talking about what they do behind the scenes when their girlfriends aren't around. Or you might find out the gossip from the locker room. And that intrigued Brooke. She loved to be a fly on the wall. And maybe that's why she liked having male roommates. Some of her friends were in fraternities, and that started to grab Brooke's attention. Not only did they throw these amazing parties, but there was also power that they held. Being in a brotherhood in a fraternity is kind of a big deal, especially when your life revolves around campus. In that spring of 1997, she started to tell the fellow journalism students that she wanted to do something serious. She had only been working on the newspaper for a few months, but she already wanted to write something that was harder and something that had more investigative work to it. That's why she decided to take on that powerful group of individuals on campus, the fraternities. They influenced student life so much, and a lot of the student government came from the ranks of fraternities and sororities. They had the most power on campus. And you know what comes with power? The ability to manipulate the most vulnerable and the weakest. Brooke wasn't one of those people, but she wanted to be a voice for them. She wanted to take a stand for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Brooke investigating fraternities to see if there was anything bad going on, or something bad going on that Brooke became aware of. We know that there were questionable activities related to frats, the parties, the underage drinking, the traditions of Greek life. So, how do they even form, and what are they? So at the basic level, fraternities are just social clubs. They're based on tradition and brotherhood, and they're supposed to be about improving yourself and the community. But that's not really what happens when you're in a fraternity in college. I'm sure you know that there are steps to getting into a fraternity. One of those is called rushing. The first thing that happens in fraternities is that they throw parties. And you come and you're impressed by the parties and the house that they're in, and you say to yourself, I want to be part of this. I want to live in a cool place. I want to be introduced to beautiful women and get opportunities on campus. And then you sort of have to apply to be a part of it. The people that are already in the fraternity, they look over your resume, your application, so to speak, and then they do a formal rush. Now, I always wondered why it was called rush. Like, why do they call it rush week? And I found out while doing this case, it's because rush comes from that period of time when fraternities are rushing to get to the freshmen before another fraternity grabs them. So this is just recruitment. It signifies this active role that the fraternity takes to find the very best members. There's also sort of a secret society in a lot of these fraternities. But if you're not familiar, other things go on, like hazing and terrible things like dares, where these fraternity members want you to prove that you're worthy enough to be one of them, and they can make you do some crazy things. You know, it can start out pretty innocent, like dare you to kiss a girl, but then things can get way worse. That's why there were allegations of forced intercourse within the fraternities. There were stories of men trying to overpower innocent women and get them to do what they want at these parties. This can be a part of Rush Week to see if the wingman can do his job and bring in the prettiest girls. Because they wield so much power on campus, these girls don't speak out. They're afraid of what would happen, especially if they're part of a sorority, because they don't want their reputation being dragged through the mud. I think you probably know what Brooke was interested in uncovering. She had gotten information regarding one of the biggest fraternities on campus, information that they were involved in harming women. And she wasn't the type of person to back down when she felt that someone had been wronged. Those students that she was interviewing in the spring of 1997 were women that were potentially involved in the supposed cover-up happening in regard to these fraternity members forcing women to have sex with them. It was said that this situation had not been properly investigated or prosecuted. Through the summer, she's investigating, and when she gets there in the fall, she approaches the journalism department and some of her professors with her idea of this groundbreaking story, with what she thinks is really going on, to put her name on the map when it comes to investigative journalism. And I have to say, her professors, as much as they believed in her and as much as they wanted her to succeed, and they knew she had ambition and that she could do this, that she could accomplish this, she could write this story and write it well, they were apprehensive. They knew that this was a risky move. They didn't want to discourage her, but at the same time, one of her professors told her to please be careful, tread lightly. But Brooke, she was hard-headed. She was one of those people that when she thinks she can't do something, she wants to do it more. And she was determined to move forward, and she did, full force. One thing she noticed was that the rules were different for the individuals that were in fraternities and sororities. That's why it was assumed that these claims were never followed through with. People who want to bury things usually want them to stay buried. So of course, once the fraternity got wind of what she was doing around campus, even talking to other men in the fraternity, well, they looked at Brooke with a lot of concern and animosity, and they did not have a very favorable opinion of Brooke at that point. Another thing I failed to mention is that her roommate, Jason, he's actually in this fraternity, the biggest fraternity on campus. He knows all the stories, he knows everything about what goes on at the parties. He's friends with a lot of the alleged perpetrators. He's the best source of information that Brooke has. So she comes up with a plan. She's going to go with Jason to all these different frat parties to get her foot in the door. And then she's going to ask questions to the people there. She's hoping that someone would give her information that she could dig into. She hopes that will lead her to more tips, and hopefully she can go deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole. But like I said, once something is deep enough, There are going to be people out there that don't want it to come to the surface. There was a favorite day of the week for these fraternities to have their parties. Thursdays, they call it Thirsty Thursdays. I'm sure you've heard of it before. That's when everyone would party. They would stay out into the early morning. I'm talking about 6 o'clock in the morning. It's August 1997, and Brooke decides to carry out her plan. And of course, she wants someone with her, so she recruits her friend Shauna, who's also an editor for the school newspaper, and she accompanies her and her friends, Brian and Jason. They all go to these parties together that night. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're definitely having a very good time. But that's the thing. Shauna and Brooke are not there to have a good time. They're busy. They're going through different groups of people and basically taking notes, seeing what they could learn about this alleged situation that was going on during Thirsty Thursday. It ends up being worth staying out late because Brooke was able to get the name and contact information of the girl that made the claim that she had been forced into intercourse by someone in this fraternity. And this was huge. What you have to remember, and it's something that Brooke might not have taken into account, she's doing this in a public place. There are other people standing around, other people that are hearing the conversation. Even if she didn't notice, it wasn't only people that were in the fraternity that were listening in on those conversations and had moles of their own, so to speak, going around and making sure that she wasn't really infiltrating their little secret brotherhood. Her own friends were starting to hear rumors that she was in for it. She began receiving threats, mostly through her own friends, so they were told, and they would relate to her. If she didn't stop what she was doing, something bad was going to happen. They're not just concerned for Brooke's safety, because that was probably the biggest concern, but they're afraid that someone is going to get her in trouble and she's going to get expelled, because after all, she does not have permission from the school to do this. The school paper is its own entity, and yes, obviously it's associated with the university, but at the same time, some of these things might be borderline harassment of their own, especially when these are just allegations. You are innocent until proven guilty. She wasn't even sure if this woman had pressed charges or what was going on, and at this point, a lot of her friends were getting concerned. They came to her and they told her their thoughts, and she pretty much told them, "I'm not afraid. I can take care of myself." And as a matter of fact, she had a plan. She was going to move out of Jason's once and for all, because she was doing better. She was at a point where she could live on her own. Not only that, she wanted to be in a place that would make it easy for her to get to campus. Not only just to campus, but to the journalism department. And she gets lucky. She finds a quaint little house right across from the journalism lab and the humanities building where she's taking most of her classes. She also has somewhat of a family there. She was really close to her professors, two in particular, a married couple who both worked in the department, Rebecca and Michael Mullen. They were her advisors. They loved Brooke for her drive, her ambition, and they even kind of looked up to her in some ways. It was like she was wise beyond her years, but was she? It was actually a really good thing that she found this house to move into, because she did start receiving threats herself, and now Brooke was scared. The good thing, and the thing that made her feel secure, was that the house that she moved into was owned by a campus police officer. That made her feel really good about her decision. She knew at any moment, if there was a problem, there would be somebody right there who could help her, who wouldn't mind doing things like walking her to and from campus. The landlord's name is Mike Nardine, and Brooke moves in July 1997, during the summer. It turns out the campus officer/landlord couldn't really stop the threats that were coming in because they were verbal and through email. But again, Brooke at least felt safe. She was a little shaken, but it didn't faze her. Then her parents started to become worried. Now I have to go back to before she moved. She got a little scared because she was at a friend's house and a truck full of frat boys arrived. They started yelling at her and threatening her, and that is what prompted her to finally move off campus to the little house. Her mom convinced her to make a report. In this report, Brooke explained that one of the fraternity members said that if she didn't stop, she was going to be dead. This was in the summer when school was not in session, but fall was soon approaching. Before they knew it, they were back in classes. It had been a couple of months since she settled into her new house. Braun was visiting. He would come over on days when they could go out and party, and he would just follow along. And with the new beginning of the semester, it's a fresh start. She's in her second year of college, which is actually the final year of her program, and then she plans to transfer somewhere in New York. It's really just unfortunate that all the work Brooke was putting in would never amount to finding success because someone had other plans. When you're 19 like Brooke was, there's nothing to stop you. You feel like you can take on the world. You don't think you're going to leave this world anytime soon. Maybe in your 70s, maybe in your 80s, or maybe you'll even live to your 90s. But there just wasn't a thought in her mind that this semester would be the last one she ever attended at Vincennes University. The beginning of the end was that fall semester in September of 1997. Brooke was just going through her normal, everyday routine, but one thing that worried her friends was that she did live alone. And yes, there was some comfort in the fact that she had a campus security guard right there if she needed him. Besides, she spent most of her time on campus. It wasn't until after classes were out that she would go to parties or other events to further her goal of gaining enough experience to become a real journalist. And that's the only time she was out and about. She was excited too because she was getting so close to uncovering the truth about what happened to this woman who claimed to be assaulted on the steps of the fraternity house. She made that call and set up an interview with the woman. It was to take place the second week of September. She's more excited than ever. She's determined to dig deeper no matter what. And this was just 1 month before Brooke becomes the victim herself. It's 9:34 p.m. the night of September 7th. A call came in to the Indiana State Police Department. The terrified voice on the other end was Brooke's brother, Braun. He was calling from Brooke's house. He had just stumbled upon a scene that no one should ever have to witness, especially when it involves someone you love. What he saw that night is something that will probably stay with him for the rest of his life. Because that is what detectives said after they arrived on scene and walked into Brooke's bedroom. No matter how seasoned or tough you are as a detective, it never shields you from the trauma that you experience when you have to witness something as absolutely horrific as what they saw that night. Just like many nights before it, it wasn't unusual for Braun to head over to Brooke's house before the weekend came to an end. He came by a couple of times earlier that day, once around 4:30 p.m. and again around 7:30 or 8 p.m. That second time, he ran into Brooke's classmate, Jill, who told him that she tried to drop off some schoolwork to Brooke around 10:30 in the morning, but Brooke never came to the door. Jill then gave the papers to Braun, and he said he would try again later that night. So he came back around 9:10 p.m. and he expected Brooke to greet him at the door after he knocked, but again he did not get an answer. However, he thought he could hear something inside, so he let himself in with his key. As soon as he walked in, something didn't feel right. Braun calls out to his sister, but she doesn't answer, so he walked further into the house, and that's when he heard something. It was something distinctive. It was the sound of running water. It didn't take him long to put it together. The water in the bathtub was running. His first thought is the obvious one. Brooke is taking a shower or a bath. So again he calls out to his sister, letting her know that he was coming inside. When he still gets no answer after calling out while he gets closer, thinking that maybe she hadn't heard him over the water, he decides to look inside. The first thing he saw were towels, but they were inside the bathtub, soaking wet. That's when he felt comfortable enough to kind of walk further into the bathroom. And he notices that Brooke is not in the shower and she's not in the bathroom. The water was still running loudly, so he reaches over and turns it off. He thought this was really weird. It's very out of character. Why wasn't Brooke in there? But the water was running, and why were there wet towels in there? He keeps calling out to her and still he hears nothing. He turns around, heads back out of the bathroom, and goes towards Brooke's bedroom door. He calls out again and doesn't hear anything, so he starts to slowly open her bedroom door. He sees her right away. I don't know what his first thought was, but she appeared to be asleep. The thing is, she was completely nude, lying face up on her mattress. As Braun's eyes adjusted, he realized that she was not sleeping. It was apparent to him right away that she was wounded, and it was bad. The first thing he did out of instinct was to cover her body with a blanket because no one should have to see something like this. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't bear to look at his sister in that condition. He immediately walked out of that house and called 911. That is where we left off. It's 9:34 p.m., and Braun is frantically calling the police to let them know that he just found his 19-year-old sister dead in her bedroom. He is in complete shock. He can't believe his big sister, his best friend, is gone. Officers race to the scene and they arrive at 10 p.m. The first person they want to talk to is Braun. Immediately after arriving, police decide to tape off the entire front yard and the perimeter of Brooke's house. They need to keep people from getting on this scene. They didn't want anyone near that house or to enter the house for any reason. Police want to know what happened when Braun found Brooke. He told them exactly what I just told you. You can't hide something this big on a close-knit university campus. As soon as police cars were rolling down that road right across from campus, people already knew something was going on. Students were trying to gather around, and people were walking towards Brooke's house wanting to know what happened. It was obvious that it was something bad when you see that yellow police tape. You know that someone is probably deceased. The word is going to travel fast, and they know that, so they're trying to contain this crime scene as fast as possible, as much as possible. Guess who else gets word? Brooke's mom and dad, and as expected, they are completely devastated. Out of all the cases that I've done, I haven't gotten this close to understanding what a family was going through. But in this case, the family was so vocal. They were a huge part of Brooke's life. This was their only daughter. They were going to do anything and everything in their power to find out who did this to her. So from the very moment that they found out they were there, they ran to that scene, and they wanted to know everything the police had. Watch them as they're crying, as they're bawling their eyes out, as Janet screamed, a mother standing there wanting so badly to rush in and hug her daughter, but is unable to get close to her. Detectives go in, they do their initial sweep of different areas of the house, the living room, the kitchen, trying to see if anyone broke in. And there are no signs that any windows were pried open, that the door had been opened with any kind of tool or anything. There was nothing to suggest there was any kind of forced entry. They come into the bathroom. One detective named Detective Winkler sees the towel in the bathtub. There's also a bottle of bleach on the floor next to the bathtub. The very first thing that he thinks is that someone tried to clean up. Somebody was comfortable enough that they stayed after what they did to Brooke to attempt to clean up and cover their tracks. When he makes his way into the kitchen, he notices that the kitchen sink is filled with water, and laying on top of all these miscellaneous items are 2 empty bottles of dishwashing soap. Again, the detective considered the fact that this person went out of their way to clean up. When he looks deeper into that sink, he notices that underneath some dishes, there's a knife. He collects the knife and he sees blood on it. It's bagged for testing. The house is pretty cluttered, and that's normal. She's a college student, a lot of things going on. But it was hard to differentiate between normal, everyday items and weapons. For example, they found a pair of scissors. They didn't know if that was possibly used in some way or another. And when I say used, when they got that call from Braun, they already knew that she had been fatally wounded, so they were already preliminarily looking for things that could have caused those wounds. When the detectives make their way into Brooke's room, they see a blanket covering her body. They have to remove that blanket, and they have no idea what they're going to find underneath. One of the detectives carefully lifts it up, and he realizes that Brooke has several wounds, multiple wounds to her chest. These wounds are through and through. At first glance, it appeared as though she had been stabbed in the back, and what he believes he's seeing in the front or exit wounds on her chest. So imagine how hard and how deep someone would have had to go to cause those wounds. The amount of force that's needed is over the top, as though they were angry or they were enraged. But something else stood out. The detectives have been doing this so long that they knew right away that there were signs that the assailant forced Brooke to have intercourse. So they know they need to collect DNA from around her body, on her body, and inside her body. It's so important in these cases to get a semen sample if there's one present, and there was in this case Vincennes. In forensics during homicides, the victim's body can tell a story, it can hold the key to what happened. So that initial examination of her body indicated that she had probably been deceased for less than 24 hours. They also noticed that there were some blood smears on a wall that appeared to have been from a struggle of some kind, and they were in a race against time. They have to gather as much evidence as possible and get it tested as soon as possible. Brooke's body is being transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Meanwhile, detectives interview Braun again to gather information about who could have done this to her, who was she close to, what was she doing the night that she was killed. I don't think that they were prepared for what they were about to hear. They weren't prepared for how busy Brooke's social life really was. This crime was going to take them in so many different directions. 90% of victims of homicides committed in the United States know their killer, so they need to begin their investigation with all the people that Brooke knew, and you already know she knew a lot of people. Detectives believe one of those people wanted her dead. After speaking with Braun, there's one name that rises to the top of their list: Steve Huffman. This is the guy that Brooke had been dating on and off for a while. That's where they want to start the jealousy angle. From what they gathered, Steve wanted more, and Brooke was not interested in being more serious. They know they're going to focus on him first, but they need to canvass the immediate area to find out if anyone saw anything that night. Then they're going to create a timeline of Brooke's final day, and then, from the inside out, starting with the people she knew best, and then to those on the fringes. We're talking about a very busy university campus, not a quaint residential neighborhood. Everyone thinks they have information, they've got tips, they've got clues, and all of them want to be involved. It's a very hard task for investigators to separate the truth from invalid information. And as the word gets around campus, everyone is freaking out, especially women. They're used to walking around campus at night, going from one party to the next after drinking, and sometimes they're alone. Now they're carrying mace and not wanting to leave their dorms. No one expected anything like this to happen. When Brooke's close friend Shauna finds out what happened to Brooke, she falls to the floor and cries. She's in utter disbelief. She grew up in Vincennes just like Brooke, and she couldn't imagine anything like this would ever happen there. The entire journalism department was in shock. The ambitious girl that was always looking for the most compelling story was now the story, but not in the way she would have ever wanted. It's really hard for me not to think of someone's last moments with everything she had to look forward to. There had to be a phase of emotions and thoughts and feelings that a person goes through in their final moments. I think about it like this. There's the survival instinct, having this confidence and hope that you're going to get away, to the next phase, to being overpowered with thoughts that you may not make it, but still thinking there could be a way out because we have that will to live. But then you come to this realization at some point that you're probably not going to survive this. You lose all hope, and you're looking into the eyes of your killer and succumbing to the pure evil that they're about to unleash. She was alive when she was stabbed, so to think about the pain that she went through, knowing that there was nothing she could do, the thoughts were going to remind, what were they? Family, friends, or brother, her future. Then it must just turn to darkness, and I'm sorry I even have to go there, but it's just unfathomable to me. Now let's go back to the day before Brooke was murdered. It was Saturday, September 6th, 1997. It wasn't a school day, but Brooke had a busy day. She went to a number of places on and off campus. She met with several people, went out to eat, out to parties, It was a lot for them to sift through. It's a tough job. There are thousands of students rushing around to different functions all day and all through the night. The first person that Brooke met up with that day was Steve. You remember Steve? They met up at 3 p.m. and they hung out for a few hours. Then they walked to a local Subway restaurant to grab a sandwich. Then at 7 p.m., Brooke's friend Biff Elliott, who was from the journalism program, came by her house and they walked together to the softball field for a concert they were covering for the newspaper. After their work was done, Biff dropped Brooke off at a party, which was a couple of blocks from her house, around 9 p.m. She went there to meet up with one of the guys she was seeing named Tommy Williams. They hung out there for a while until about 10:30 p.m., and then they left for another party that was being hosted by some of the university soccer players. They stayed there until about 12:30 a.m. then left for Brooke's house around 1 o'clock in the morning. A campus police officer recalls seeing them as they walked through campus towards Brooke's house. This was the very last time that they have any record of Brooke being alive. 19 hours later, her brother Braun found her body. That's a pretty big gap of time before they dug deeper into each individual that she'd been with that day. The autopsy report comes in. It confirms that Brooke had been through a violent attack. She had multiple bruises on her body, and she had been stabbed 13 times. At least one of those times was in the breast, and the others were in her back. Both of her lungs were punctured, and she had been restrained, violated, and strangled. The cause of death was bleeding out from her wounds. The weapon was the steak knife that was in the sink. And even though the assailant attempted to wash away all the evidence, there was a small piece of Brooke's flesh still attached, which was confirmed by DNA testing. There was also a DNA profile of the semen that was left behind. They didn't have a match in the system, but the number they gave it in the lab was 137F. And now they're on a search for who the sample 137F belonged to. Their first person of interest is finally brought in for an interview. Steve admits to police that they were in a casual on and off relationship and they were not exclusive. He does add that he was with her on Saturday. He goes through the time that they hung out at home, at Subway, and then when he saw her at the party that night. He told detectives he was at the party she attended on campus. This was the first party, this was the one where she met up with Tommy, and then they left for the soccer player's house. Steve says he was drinking a lot that night, but he did see her. However, she left and he stayed for the rest of the night. He says he doesn't know where she went or who she was with. They pressed Steve. They wanted to know why he didn't leave with her, if they were kind of seeing one another more seriously than other guys in her life. What was the story they want to know? Was there a fight or anything? And he insists that there wasn't. They had already hung out that day, and it's typical to run into each other when they're hanging out with other people. He said to ask his friends, he never left, and there was no fight. However, his friends were all drunk that night, and none of them can provide a solid alibi for Steve. However, he sticks to the same story even after detectives press him for several hours, and he willingly gives them a DNA sample. He's released until they get the results back. So now they turn their attention to Tommy. He was the last person seen with Brooke at 1 a.m. walking through the student union towards her house. Tommy actually comes in on his own accord before they even asked him to drop by. And Tommy was not a current student at the university. He was an alumnus and he was in town visiting friends. He does admit that he was with Brooke most of the night. They walked home from party number 2 at the soccer player's house, and they had sex at Brooke's. He left for the night around what he believes is 1:30 a.m. The issue that they have with Tommy's account of events is what he did afterward. They couldn't find anyone that had seen him until 3 in the morning when he was spotted walking through campus. By 5 a.m., his friends that he was staying with said they saw him asleep on their couch. There were a few hours there that were unaccounted for, so they asked him for a DNA sample, which he willingly gives. But if you know science and you're watching videos like this, there is probably going to be semen that matches Tommy's DNA, but will it match 137F? That's the question. And I had a question. How do they know the 137F is the perpetrator's semen? Because if I'm being straight up with you, if Tommy had sex with Brooke, I'm guessing the only way that his DNA wouldn't be there is if he used protection. I'm gonna guess that he wore a condom because 137F is the sample that police are focusing in on. And they know one sample that definitely doesn't match, and that's Steve's, so they rule him out for now. At this point, weeks have gone by, and Brooke's family didn't feel like they were being included in the investigation. They were speaking out left and right to any and all media outlets that would give them the opportunity to go public with their concerns, which was the lack of communication and lack of updates from the police. They had to consistently and constantly call in and beg for information, and they found that to be very inconsiderate. So they organized their own community meetings, not only to discuss Brooke's murder and to gather their own tips, but to talk about the unsolved ones that still plague Knox County. The meeting had a name. It was called Citizens for Accountability in Government, and Brooke's mom Janet told reporters that she felt sick that the killer was still on the loose. She said, "Brooke is not here anymore. She can't breathe, she can't laugh or talk or sleep, and her brother will have to live with what he saw for the rest of his life. Someone stole her life and stole her from us. Every day that goes by is another day of freedom for the killer, and another day further from the truth of finding out who took Brooke's life." Then Brooke's dad Maurice added, "I know our police officers are probably working as hard as they can with their limited amount of resources and manpower, but our biggest fear is lack of community support and that people will forget what has happened." Both of Brooke's parents said they know that nothing will bring Brooke back, but catching who did this will bring closure to such a traumatic event. The family kept pushing for the FBI to get involved, saying that Knox County police were over their heads. Brooke's mom provides some new information to investigators, one of the most promising leads to date. The campus security officer, the one that saw Tommy and Brooke walk through campus, he's the one that's Brooke's landlord, and she's wondering, could he have given police that information to divert their attention? But why would he do that? It turns out Brooke had mentioned to a number of close friends and family that he was okay at first, but then she felt really uncomfortable. This landlord conveniently had properties right near a university. He has young girls coming in and out, and it's just a rotating basis of women year after year, semester after semester, for I don't even know how long. He had access to Brooke's home anytime he wanted to go inside, and he used that privilege. According to Brooke, she was worried about living there because he would just show up inside her house. Brooke told Shauna that she thought he was obsessed with her. Not for nothing, on one occasion, she had just gone out of the shower. She wasn't even dressed yet. She was just wearing a towel wrapped around her, and to her shock, he was standing in her living room. She was terrified, and she was definitely caught off guard. No call, no knock on the door, nothing. So she yells at him, and she says, "What do you think you're doing in here, coming in here unannounced?" He tells her to calm down. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you were home." And he insisted that he already told her he would be over that day to spray for bugs. Another time, she told her mom that she saw him drive down the back alley and shine a flashlight into her window. And she told a friend he had come on to her, especially because he kept seeing men coming in and out from Brooke's house. So apparently he assumed he could work his way in, even offering her free rent in exchange for sex. And that is scummy. Detectives need to look into this man's background. And sure enough, women had rented from him in the past, and they started coming forward with all kinds of allegations that he would spy on them, all kinds of weird stuff going on in that house. This definitely piqued their interest and made him the prime suspect. He saw Brooke the night. He could have easily walked over there, seen Tommy leave, let himself in with his own key. It definitely made sense considering there was no forced entry. So they bring him in, and he's angry. He's completely bent out of shape with these allegations. And he tells them, "Those are lies. I'm just a responsible landlord and security officer doing his job." He admits he's gone into Brooke's house several times without permission, but insists he's always had good intentions and good reason. He said it was at times when he thought she was not home, He explained it was his right to do that, and he needed to take care of things. He always let his tenants know that he went in, but now it's his word against others. He takes a polygraph test, and it's inconclusive. Detectives do get a sample of his DNA, and they really think they finally found their man. I'll let you know right now, neither Tommy's DNA nor the landlord's were matched to 137F. Tommy is not completely ruled out yet because he doesn't have an alibi, and I'm thinking his semen had to have been somewhere on that scene. But again, I don't know. Clearly, if they're only focusing on this one sample and they've already tested his, they don't think it's him. But what if the landlord came in after the person left 137F behind? Maybe the sex with the person who belonged to 137F was consensual, so they can't rule out the security guard yet because he doesn't have an alibi. There's another theory that's being looked into, though. It just so happens that Brooke was actively looking for a roommate and had put a listing in the Trailblazer. Detectives are scared that someone might have responded to that listing, and they were somehow able to gain access to Brooke's place. They test the DNA of 50 potential suspects, and none of them are a match. They are back at square one, which is beyond frustrating until they get a major break in the case. Brooke's parents had been consistently holding those meetings at the town hall once a week. A lot of people were in attendance every time, and the police were not exactly thrilled because it seemed like an us against them type of thing. Even more upsetting to police was the fact that Brooke's family kept putting up these signs all around town, featuring all of the people who had been murdered in Knox County without the killers ever being caught. And they wondered if Brooke will become another statistic. Their group was starting to get riled up. They were discussing those 5 most prominent unsolved murders. Brooke, of course, Lisa McCracken, Brent Brand, Kathy Westfall, and Sherry Gibson. However, there was one positive thing that happened as a result of these meetings. The topic of Brooke's latest piece about their fraternity comes up. As we know, there were issues between Brooke and the members and a lot of rumors swirling around. Plus, detectives were given the emails, the threatening emails, the ones telling Brooke to stop writing the story or else. And this was huge. They bring in all the students and professors from the journalism department. These are the people that Brooke spent the most time with, and that made sense, considering how serious she was about her future in journalism. They have nothing but positive things to say about Brooke, and they're mourning her loss. They had just attended her candlelight vigil, and hundreds of students came out to pay their respects. People said they could feel the fear all around campus, and no one felt safe. Now her classmates want to provide any information they could to help find the man who did this. They're all on edge, especially Deborah. She tells police she's upset about how many girls are still partying and walking home late at night on campus. And she tells police, "You need to find the killer." She recounts her hearing a girl say to a friend that she was so drunk last night that she didn't come home till 6 a.m. and she didn't even know where she was. Well, Deborah wanted to turn to her and say, "You can't do that anymore." She wanted to scold her and said, "You shouldn't have done it before, but you can't do that now." If the fellow journalism student who walked with Brooke to the concert on Saturday was ruled out, so now they turn their focus and their attention to this controversial story that Brooke was working on. The Bakers are convinced someone in that fraternity was responsible for what happened to Brooke. Brooke's professor, Mr. Mullins, was the one who initially saw the email threatening Brooke to stop. It said something to the effect of, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. If you write this story, you'll be sorry. Leave us alone, mind your own business." The emails were tracked to a couple of guys in the fraternity, but both of their DNA results were not a match. Now detectives turned to the prosecuting attorney and the alleged fraternity cover-up. It was determined that the sex was consensual, and they had evidence to prove it. It was just a bunch of rumors, and Brooke was caught up in the middle of it, wanting so badly for this to turn into a real captivating story where she could uncover all these secrets and expose the fraternity. But now a different story is starting to emerge, and it was in regard to Brooke's investigation. Detectives find out that Brooke had a little habit of embellishing the truth, And perhaps that was just part of her storytelling style. She liked to maybe use her imagination to create these captivating situations with a lot of suspense and drama. Because there was no evidence that she was even writing a story, not at all. Her professors know her, and normally she takes a lot of notes. She's always busy compiling evidence, creating drafts, but they find nothing, nothing at all. And this is all investigated at the journalism lab, in her personal paperwork, her desk, her workspace. There was just a pure lack of interview notes, rough drafts of the story, no files containing anything. It was actually assumed that Brooke was kind of eating up all the attention she was getting, and she was doing it for clout. But her family insists that that is not their Brooke. She's not like that. She was a serious and dedicated student that wouldn't just make things up. She wouldn't make things up for a story. And investigators do find some truth to her story. There was a woman who reported one of the frat boys for forcing himself on her. But as it turns out, she had been really wasted, and she was already talking to him. It was consensual. But she just regretted it, so she filed a fake report for revenge. Detectives thought Brooke, being very good at her job, would have known this right away. She would have had to do very little investigative work to find out that this has already kind of been resolved. That's why detectives assume that Brooke most likely made up some of the circumstances to develop it into something more mysterious and published-worthy. Nevertheless, the detectives do have to look into it, so they gathered DNA of more than 100 men from the fraternity, and not one of them is a match to 137F. As the case comes to a standstill, Brooke's family lay her to rest. Her gravestone is one of the prettiest ones I've ever seen, and I don't know why I'm saying this because it's a very unusual thing to think about, but I want to show it to you. Her father designed it. She loved the sun, the moon, and the stars, and at the bottom it reads, "Shine on you crazy diamond." Brooke was such a light in her friends' and family's lives, but her case went dark. Police had conducted over 400 interviews and had a database of 572 people that were involved in the case. Yet not one of those leads matched 137F. The only hope they had is of a very morbid nature. They wait until he strikes again. Life goes on for the residents of Vincennes as Brooke rests in peace. Then 2 years later, something happens. Something that felt too familiar to police in Vincennes, and you'll find out exactly what made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. It's Monday, July 5th, right after the July 4th weekend. They find themselves in another bloody apartment only 7 blocks from where Brooke was found. The apartment belonged to another Vincennes University student named Erica Norman. Erica Elaine Norman was born November 13, 1977 to Dean and Elaine Norman. She has 3 siblings, Christopher, Timothy, and Rhonda. This girl was smart and talented and beautiful. During junior high and high school, she was on the academic team, was a royal ambassador, she played softball, she was in gymnastics and the drama club for 3 years, in the science club, and a member of the Spanish club for 4 years. She was also in the Spanish Honor Society. At this time in 1999, Erica was 21 years old and she was a foreign language major. She also took classes in broadcasting at the university. She was a loyal sister in the Alpha Theta Chi sorority where she served as their vice president. She was just this cute little petite girl. Her friends adored her. She was sweet. She was always smiling, always cracking witty jokes and making people laugh. She enjoyed music and singing and was active in her church. She was just an all-around vibrant, happy person, and she was very close to her family, especially her mommy Elaine and her sister Rhonda, even though they lived 100 miles away. She also had a cute little dog that she absolutely adored named Smokey. Erica was very involved on campus. She was the host of the campus radio station, The Rock, and she had the perfect voice and personality for radio. Her broadcasting professors kept encouraging her to keep going because they thought she was just made for it. Her best friend, Ileana, knew Erica since high school, and the two of them spent a lot of time together. She met Erica the first day of school when they were just teenagers. Erica had a helpful heart. She loved to assist anyone in need. And Erica noticed that Ileana, she looked left out and alone. So she left her own friend's table at lunch to go sit with Ileana. That's the type of person she was. The friends were attending different colleges now in 1999, but they kept in touch weekly because they had plans to move to Honduras and finish out their studies there. Erica wanted to perfect her foreign language skills and Ileana planned to study medicine. They also dreamed of traveling the world together. But now Erica is missing. Yes, she is nowhere to be found, and it's like she vanished without a trace. A call had come into the Vincennes police department from a tenant in Erica's apartment. He said he heard something really strange coming from inside when he walked by on Sunday afternoon, and it sounded like rushing water. It was really loud and extremely noticeable, and he found it to be odd, but he let it go. However, the next morning when he walked past again, he could still hear water running. So he knocked on the door, but no one answered. He had this gut feeling that something wasn't right, so he tried the door and it was unlocked, so he let himself in. He's walking toward the sound of the running water, and he noticed when he got to the bathroom, the sink and the bathtub faucets were on full blast. He reaches over, he turns them both off, and that's when he sees blood on the walls. He immediately runs out and gets the landlord, who eventually calls 911. Now police are standing in Erica's apartment, trying to piece together what could have happened to her. From the looks of it, it doesn't look good. The apartment is a complete mess. It looks like a very intense struggle ensued. There were couch cushions that were scattered. One of them is missing. There are things just strewn around all over. Blood smears on the wall and the vanity. A broken table was overturned. There was a pair of shorts on the floor. But there's one thing that made them stop dead in their tracks. All the memories of standing in Brooke's house came flooding back. The bathtub. It's full of water, and inside, they see the couch cushions and a tote lid in a duffel bag. One of the officers had this gut feeling. He knew that whoever did this was the same person that killed Brooke. The items in the bathtub just gave him the chills. It was like Brooke Baker's place all over again, like the assailant was trying to clean up, except there's no Erica. Where is she? There was no forced entry, the door was unlocked, anyone could have come in or out. They don't suspect a robbery because there was cash still laying there. Erica's purse was still there, and that's actually not a good sign. Most people don't leave home without taking their purse. They think, okay, there's blood here, what if she had an accident? Could she possibly be at the hospital? So they call and she's not there. One thing's for sure, whoever left that blood was badly injured. They make a call to Erica's mother to inform her that her daughter is missing, and Elaine is stunned. She could not believe it because it didn't make sense. She had just spoken to Erica. She said that Erica had holiday weekend plans and she sounded excited. And now she's missing. Her mother calls Ileana, and she is just as concerned and confused. Ileana knew that Erica was sometimes too quick to trust people. She just saw the good in them and may have overlooked the bad. Ileana was supposed to see Erica that day, since neither one of them had classes on the weekend. But Erica never reached out. Detectives start where they always do, from inside her social circle, and make their way outward. They were informed that Erica lived with a roommate, but they were in Colorado that weekend. So after interviewing people closest to Erica, they determined that no one had seen or heard from her since Saturday night. They knew they had to start there and work their way up to Monday. So Saturday, July 3rd, Erica leaves her apartment and goes to work, where she arrives around 6 p.m. to start her shift as a waitress at the Market Street restaurant and pub in town. Saturdays are very busy, especially in a college town and on a holiday weekend. A lot of people coming in and out all night. While she's working, her shift lasted until about 10 p.m. That's when she clocked out and went to a bar called CW Dandy's in the Holiday Inn with some friends. While she was there, more of her friends joined their group, and they stayed there until last call. That's when Erica invited everyone to come over to her place to hang out, but most of her friends had plans for the next day, so they declined. But one of them said sure, Brian Jones. Friends did see them get into his car and drive toward Erica's place. That was the last time anyone saw her. Erica and Brian had known each other for a while. They both worked at Garfield's restaurant, which is where Erica first worked when she moved to Vincennes, and Brian was still employed there as a cook. Now Erica worked at the pub, but they were both part of the same friend group. Detectives questioned people from the pub and the bar where they were last seen in. A bartender remembers them. He says that he overheard Brian telling his friends that he was going to take one of these girls home tonight, kind of just bragging. But that's not too out of the ordinary for a dude, so it doesn't really raise any red flags. They already know that Erica and Brian went back to Erica's together. When they questioned Erica's friends that were there that night, they said she was completely comfortable bringing Brian back to her place. They planned to hang out and watch a movie. Brian's a nice guy. He's from Evansville, Indiana, which is about an hour away, and he moved to Vincennes to attend college. He was a good listener. He was kind of reserved, but liked to have a good time with friends, attend parties, drink, the normal college activities. Friends say he also wasn't one to make waves, but he had a large group of friends on campus, and he got along with everyone. He majored in architectural drafting, and he was smart. However, he had withdrawn from VU back in 1996, 3 whole years ago, when he was only 5 classes away from graduating. This was as a result of a really high-paying job he landed that was providing him with a solid income at the time. Most of the time that he did attend college, he had a girlfriend, and they dated for at least 2 years at this point. He was currently single and just playing the field. He lived about 2 blocks away from the school, and although he wasn't a student, he was still involved in all of the extracurricular party activities. No one had anything really negative to say about Brian, just that he was a normal guy, and his friends told police there was no way that he could be involved. But detectives have to bring him in for an interview anyway. That's just the way it is. Everyone has to be interviewed. Brian is nervous at first, but that is to be expected. And during the intense 3-hour interview, he tells police all about himself, where he's from, what he does for work, where he lives, and how he met Erica while working at Garfield's restaurant in the Holiday Inn. He explains that they're friends, they hang out in the same friend group, and he does admit to going home with her that night to watch a movie, but he claims that she fell asleep while they were watching it, so he felt like it was time for him to go. He explains he kind of nudged her to let her know he's leaving, and she was pretty much still asleep, so he put a blanket on top of Erica while she was laying there on the couch, and he let himself out. Brian is completely cooperative, and he also seems to be telling the truth. Nothing stood out, except for when he admitted that he did try to have sex with her, but she didn't want to, so they just decided to watch a movie and hang out. He allowed them to do a search of his car and his apartment, and he also willingly provides a DNA sample. Meanwhile, detectives are questioning Erica's neighbors to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything that night. It's a busy college town, and it's during a holiday, so most of the tenants report hearing the normal sounds of people partying. But a few of them mention hearing something out of the ordinary around 4 a.m., like people moving things around or something falling onto a hard surface. But no one really gave it a second thought. It's a fairly large building with a decent amount of tenants. However, there was a couple who lived next door to the building, and they had a different story. It was also about something they heard at 4 a.m., a scream. But that's not really that unusual for this town. Detectives now fear something very bad has happened to Erica. They begin to look all around the vicinity of her building for a body. If she was killed, it means her body was moved. They believe the altercation happened on her couch. That's why the couch cushions were brought to the tub. The person who did this had to move her body if she was deceased. That's not an easy job, but their search turns up nothing. Now detectives are looking through their paperwork, and they notice something that caught them off guard. Turns out that one of Brian's previous roommates, Jason Londak, he used to hook up with Brooke. Jason, Brooke's old roommate, had even been over to Brooke's house. And as a matter of fact, he was with Jason and Brooke the night that she attended those frat parties to get that information. But he says he never had a sexual relationship with her. This is a close-knit community, so would it really be that odd if he knew both Brooke and Erica? They need to find Jason and question him, so they track him down at his home at 324 Hart Street. He said that Brian used to live with him back in the fall of 1997. When Brooke had moved out, he moved in, and now Brooke's place was only 3 blocks away. Jason told detectives that not only did Brian know Brooke, but he walked her home on at least one occasion he knows about. He also said that Brian left town right after Brooke was found dead. Detectives already ran Jason's DNA during Brooke's investigation, but they realized that Brian's DNA was never taken. So they're thinking, was it a coincidence that Brian left town? Was it to avoid being caught? After the interview with Jason, detectives hone in on Brian. They interview his former boss from Lewis Bakery, where he was employed in the fall of 1997. And sure enough, he's absent from work several days after September 5th, 1997, and due to his absence he was fired on September 10th. Brooke was found on September 7th. A little caveat here. This is the high-paying job that Brian got that made him withdraw from college. So it would be a big deal if he decided not to come into work and risk being fired, which is exactly what happened. So something bigger than his dream job, so to speak, had to have happened, detectives believe, for him to skip town. During the initial interview with Brian, he turned over all the clothes that he was wearing that Saturday night, including a pair of shoes. They hadn't been thoroughly examined yet, but now they decide they need to take a real close look at them. And that's when they discover a small spot that looks like blood, and they appear to have been washed. They recall Brian saying that he had been doing laundry that whole day when they just kind of took a look inside of his house. One investigator remembers something. He says that there was a pair of jeans hanging from the bathroom door. They were wrinkled, and they looked as though they had been hung up to dry. They believe that Brian came home and showered with his clothes on. Kind of odd, but this was to make sure all the evidence was washed away. But he just didn't do a good enough job with the shoes. However, they don't have a body and they don't have Erica's DNA. They had to do a reverse DNA match, and this is by obtaining swabs for Erica's mom and dad because you get half your DNA from each of your parents. So they test the reverse DNA sample against the blood on the shoe and it's a match. But as they say, nobody, no crime. Then a light switch goes off. If he killed Erica, he might have killed Brooke. So they have his DNA, they call the lab and they ask for a rush on testing his DNA against 137F. The team worked over 40 hours straight. The call finally comes into the station after midnight, almost 2 days later, and the officer almost dropped the phone. It's a match. On July 13, 1999, Brian Jones is arrested for the brutal murder of 19-year-old Brooke Baker. They just walked up to him, put the handcuffs on, and were finally able to say, "You are under arrest for the murder of Brooke Baker." Because they had waited so long to say that, Brian is no longer cooperative. He has nothing to say about knowing Brooke at all. But they have enough evidence and information from interviews and everything they gather to piece together a theory of what happened that night. According to some of Brian's friends, Brian had somewhat of an insatiable sexual appetite. They also talked to a few women that told them he had tried to force himself on them. So here is the working theory that detectives have. Brian was attending a party just a block away from Brooke's house. He's intoxicated. He walks over there, he knocks. She either let him in because she knew him or he forced his way in. Then he most likely tried to come on to Brooke and she resisted. He decided to restrain her and do it anyway. After he realized what he had done, he decides to take her life. He cleans up after himself, then walks 3 blocks home to Jason's. He leaves town and avoids being interviewed. And because he's not a student, they don't really consider him someone that needs to be interviewed, like he's not on a list of the students attending that were in the vicinity. So when he gives his DNA in relation to Erica's case, he wasn't worried about Brooke's case because it had been 2 years and Erica is still missing. When Brian was transported from the jail to the courthouse on the day of his arraignment, the entire community seemed to flock in front. Brooke's mother had to be held back because she was on the verge of jumping on him. Here's a picture. She is with several other residents of the community just screaming in Brian's face. She yelled, "You're going to hell!" And someone else was heard shouting, "Kill her!" Meanwhile, Erica's mother Elaine and father Dean were pleading to police to find their daughter. Elaine is just sobbing as she's watching Brian being escorted into Knox County Superior Court. He was the last person to see their daughter, and her blood was found on his shoes. Erica's father tells the investigators that they should be looking near the cornfields and in ditches near the woods. He already suspects that Erica is no longer alive, and he just wants her family so that they can lay her to rest. He said the family just wanted closure and that it was pure hell finding out that your child is missing. And he thinks about her constantly. He explained that you can think about something for 5 seconds, but then it's back to her, and everything in their home reminds them of her. Now everyone is focused on Brooke and her murder, and it seems as though Erica, whose disappearance has led to the arrest of Brooke's killer, has been pushed aside. The spotlight is now back on the Baker family, and all the reporters are crowding around Brooke's mom and dad in the courtroom, eager to get a chance to hear their reaction to Brian's arrest. I understand this since they've waited 2 years for justice, 2 years for closure, and now they're closer than ever to putting Brooke's killer behind bars. But I do feel bad for Erica and her family. Brooke's mom let reporters know that she hated Brian. She said, "I want this man's life. I want him to have the death penalty. I want him to be put to death or life in prison without parole. I don't ever want him to walk on the streets again." More stories added. I want to seek the most punishment by law that can be done. Brian was escorted into the courtroom wearing a bulletproof vest. He made no comments, even though reporters were rushing over. They wanted to get a statement from him. "No," he answered the judge very calmly, and he did not seem fazed by the crowd of people. He pled not guilty and let the judge know he planned on retaining an attorney. Just about a week later, on July 20th, police get a call from a man in Illinois. He thinks he found something in a cornfield. This is the type of place that Erica's dad had suggested that the detectives search, but they didn't have to. It turns out a 29-year-old farmhand named James Hill was repairing some sprinklers on the fringe of the cornfield. He wouldn't usually be out there in that area until harvest, which was in mid-September, but something was amiss. When he got closer, he noticed the smell first. It was putrid. He went closer to investigate, and that's when he saw a badly decomposed human body. When the sheriffs arrived from both Indiana and Illinois, they had reason to believe it was the body of Erica Norman. The cornfield was straight across the Wabash River that separates Indiana from Illinois. This was approximately 3 miles from Erica's apartment. The temperature and the humidity were so high that the detectives began to sweat as soon as they left their vehicles. You can only imagine, in those conditions, what would happen to a body. Detectives searched around the immediate area and they located a wallet. It had Erica's driver's license inside. They still need the autopsy to confirm it's Erica, but they have no doubt in their minds that it was her. They believed Brian disposed of her in the cornfield because he believed correctly that no one would be in that area until the corn was being harvested in mid-September, which was more than enough time for her body to become part of the earth, just hidden beneath the soil, just a skeleton. However, that didn't go as planned. The autopsy began that evening at 6 p.m., and a forensic dentist was called in to compare dental records. This process took 2 weeks to complete. Meanwhile, there was a memorial service that was held on July 26th, and it was at a chapel on the campus. Over 300 people were in attendance, and it was so much over capacity that they had people sitting outside, listening on an intercom system. One of Erica's friends, Tara, who had met her while working at the same restaurant, talked about how much fun Erica was. She said that they became friends very fast, and they used to spend weekends at Tara's just swimming and laying up in the pool, and they had just hung out on July 2nd, a few days before she went missing. They went shopping, and Tara just said that Erica was a perfect example of what a human being should be like. She never gossiped and never had an unkind word to say about anyone, and she wanted to fall in love with someone and have a fairy tale romance. Erica's father told the crowd that if God was looking for an angel, he got the perfect one. The autopsy was still being conducted back in Illinois, but as they wait, detectives got back to work. making sure they had enough evidence to link Brian to Erica's crime. On that initial walkthrough of Brian's home, they didn't do like a thorough search because they needed an official search warrant, and they had one now for his car and his house. They found Erica's blood in his shower and on the walls of his office and in the trunk of his car, which they believe he used to transport her body. They had all they needed to charge Brian with her murder. In order to avoid the death penalty, Brian takes a plea deal and he has to plead guilty to killing Erica, but he still denies what happened to Brooke Baker. By September, the coroner's report is back in regard to Erica's cause of death, and unfortunately there was not enough forensic evidence to know for sure how she died, but in the coroner's expert opinion, her manner of death was a homicide. Almost all of her skin and internal organs were gone, and there was no damage to her skeletal remains. However, they know that her apartment showed signs of a struggle, and there was blood present. We will never truly know what happened to her that night. We can only imagine. Brooke's case went before jurors the first week of December 2000. This trial was of high public interest. There were reporters just clamoring to get inside for gavel-to-gavel coverage. The very first words out of the prosecutor's mouth, which I'm going to have to bleep, were, "You raped her." Then they went on to prove that the semen and the skin cells underneath Brooke's fingernails, which produced DNA 137F, matched Brian Eugene Jones perfectly. There was also a witness that took the stand and said they saw a scratch across Brian's face the day after Brooke's murder. The prosecution made sure to show the knife with the broken handle that had Brooke's blood on it and a piece of her flesh, and they also made sure to show that Brian was a liar. He said he never had sex with Brooke, but the DNA proves otherwise. And that was the defense's argument, by the way, that he merely had sex with Brooke, totally consensual. The defense also argued that there was very little evidence to show that Brian or Brooke, but there were several other individuals with a motive and opportunity who, well, the other guys that Brooke was having relations with. Yeah, they actually tried to paint her as though she was asking for it because she was seeing a number of men. This is victim blaming at its finest. They really tried to put poor Brooke on trial instead of Brian. The jury wasn't having it. After just 5 hours of deliberation, they reached a verdict, guilty on all counts. They didn't know this, but he was already sentenced to 60 years in prison for pleading guilty to Erica's murder, and now on top of that sentence, he was given life without the possibility of parole for the murder of Brooke Baker. It's closure for the families, but it's just sad that Erica had to die so that Brooke's murder could be solved. There's a couple other things that I wanted to tell you. Brian never spoke at the trial, but years later, he wrote a letter to Brooke's family, and in it, he said that he had searched and searched for the right words to convey to them how terrible he felt for taking such a wonderful person from this world. Brooke's mom didn't care what he had to say. She wondered why he hadn't thought of that before he killed Brooke. Sadly, Brooke's mother passed away December 9th, 2004 at the age of only 47. She's buried right next to Brooke, and here are their gravestones. One more thing, a very important one. I want to read you something so special that was put on a plaque on the back of Brooke's gravestone. It's a piece that she wrote when she was younger, and it's about heaven and what she thought it would be like. I want to share with you because I know that she wanted to be remembered for her writing. And it's a little long, but I promise it's worth it. It's called A Place to Imagine, and it goes like this. As I start to fade into that unknown realm, I can feel the warmth like a summer's breeze fluttering across my face. The darkness surrounds me, making me feel so alone. I am scared because I know not only what awaits me. Then suddenly, light. It's a light I've never seen or felt. The light totally engulfs me. Not only can I see the orange-purple light, but I can feel it too. The warmth takes over. I feel safe. Then I enter the light. What is before me is a place like nothing I've ever seen or dreamed. Great gates of pearls overpower me. The feeling of a presence much greater than myself is waiting. As I pass through the gates, to my left is a celestial chorus, the figures in flowing white gowns with hair of wheat blowing in a zenith wind, singing with voices that make all my emotions swell. The beauty of the chorus is nothing compared to what is before me. A glorious white castle so tall I can barely distinguish where it begins nor where it ends, is open to everyone. Streets paved with gold so rich that it makes me squint, yet I can look right at it. In front of me, the grass is emeralds crushed to that of the softest velvet. The blue sky I've ever seen is set behind the great castle. I look closer and see huge white clouds floating like suds in a fresh bath. At a closer glance, I see the archangels floating along with the clouds, their golden harps playing a tune that could only be heard in such a place as this. I see a river of crystal flowing from an unknown source. A tree stands before me, and I know that the leaves of this tree could heal the mortal world. A rainbow joins the clouds in the beautiful sky. This is God's promise to never again send floods to destroy. The other place I walk toward the castle, trying to take in all the beauty at once, but I know I have forever. As I pass through the doors of the great castle, the scent of a spicy cinnamon incense fills my nose. It is much better than what I've smelled in the past. Archangels Michael and Gabriel meet me with smiles, and in a heavenly voice say, "He's waiting." I approach the great light and see a face that is neither man nor woman, but a great white light with no real distinguishing features. I feel so peaceful, and then he speaks. The voice is overpowering, and I can feel the greatness. He tells me that I will walk an eternity of happiness, and all of my dreams will be fulfilled. There will be no pain in this place. This is a place where all religions meet on common ground, where no one hurts, and where everyone is happy. Everyone I've ever known and loved is here. Together we can walk the emerald pastures. The suffering I felt in the previous world is no longer here. All I feel is an overwhelming sense of exhilaration. I have reached my final home, heaven. Picture this: fresh out of high school, you cross paths with your soulmate in the most unexpected setting, cosmetology school. A fast and passionate romance blossoms into marriage, and your honeymoon feels like the start of forever. But in a cruel and unforeseen turn, paradise transforms into your tragic final chapter. Now, let's get into this case for today. As usual, there are several people that I want to introduce you to, maybe more people in this case than many others, but I want to start with Yolanda Cerrillo. In 2002, she was 28 years old, and she was a single mom living in Miami, Florida. I'm sure most of you have heard of Miami, but I still want to paint a picture of where these events took place. And Miami is the party capital of South Florida. There's great weather year-round. It's perfect for spending time at the beach. It's full of beautiful people with, hot bodies and pool parties. It's an exciting place, and it has a great nightlife. There's a part of Miami called South Beach, and it's full of hotels and bars that line the beach. There's really no end to the fun. It's all about being gorgeous and having the time of your life, hooking up, hanging out, and leaving your worries behind you. You'll see people in designer outfits, foreign cars, and perfect bodies, whether they're surgically enhanced or due to hours in the gym. It is heaven for single people, vacationers, and anyone that just enjoys the fast-paced lifestyle. As a matter of fact, some of the bars don't even close until the sun comes up, so you will be leaving the club and driving or walking past people on their way to work. Yolanda wasn't living in the heart of Miami Beach. She lived a more laid-back lifestyle. She was more on the quiet side. She was pretty, had big brown eyes, dark hair, and was shy and down to earth. She was doing her best to be a good mom to her little girl. She was already over the party life. She was conservative and ready to find a husband to settle down with, and she finally found the one, her boyfriend, Michelle Escoto. It was cool because they were friends first and they got along really well. Eventually, things just naturally progressed into a romantic relationship. They met because they were both going to school for computer technology. Michelle had plans to start a very lucrative career in tech. He's everything Yolanda has always wanted, and he's what a lot of women have always wanted. He's quite a looker, 6 feet tall, handsome, takes care of himself, charming, smart, ambitious. He's a catch, and Yolanda caught him. They do also say opposites attract, and they were definitely opposites. Michelle is outgoing, likes to drink, be the life of the party, adventurous, romantic, fast-paced, and an excitement seeker. Maybe people with his personality type find comfort and stability with someone like Yolanda. He doesn't have to worry about her doing anything devious, but that's kind of his nature. However, at this point in his life, he's kind of tamed that beast. He's 30 years old and has shown Yolanda that he's serious about settling down. The couple had been living together for over a year, sharing each other's lives, and he's even somewhat of a stand-in father figure to her child. A family man that dotes on Yolanda and is committed to the relationship. Things are going really well. There's just one thing that Michelle isn't quite content with. He wants to do more in his life. He wants a better career, and one day he dreams of opening his own business. He frequently shares these goals with Yolanda, and she fully supports him. She wants him to be happy and thrive, especially because it means that they will thrive. That's important to Yolanda because she wants to marry Michelle. They discuss their future, and Michelle had promised that once he's making the big bucks, they'd have the life that they both dreamed of. So Michelle starts to brainstorm different industries that he could work in, and with all the beautiful people in Miami, there was no lack of beauty salons, aesthetic med spas, and surgery centers. After thinking about it and the talents that he already had, he decided to look into cosmetology. He was already good at cutting hair, and he was confident that he could learn more of the business aspect and then open his own salon. It would be great if just anyone could go right into styling, but Florida has strict rules when it comes to anything dealing with people's services. There's actually a Florida Cosmetology Act. You need a license to work in the beauty industry in Florida. So Michelle finds a school nearby called LaBelle Beauty Academy and decides to enroll. It still exists today and is in the 8th Street Shopping Center. Right here I'm going to show you a picture on Google Maps. On the website it says "Created to Create." They have flexible schedules, affordable payment plans, financial aid for people that qualify, and endless opportunities. This sounded perfect to Michelle. The schedules are anywhere from Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., like a full-time job, or going in the evening from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Yolanda is expecting that Michelle would be gone a lot, and she was okay with that, because it was important for him to reach his goals. Sometimes, you do have to make compromises and sacrifices in relationships for the good of the whole relationship and for one another. So Michelle starts classes in February of 2002, and he's a big fish in a small pond because he's one of the very few men, straight men at that, attending the beauty school. Of course, beauty school tends to attract beautiful people or people who want to look their best, so he is surrounded by beautiful women. Not just that, but young, beautiful women. He is in his element, to say the very least. If you know anything about cosmetology school, you are there to practice your craft on fellow students. That means hands-on experience. Michelle was really enjoying beauty school, and maybe it was because of what he was learning, or maybe it was because of all the attention he was getting from a number of women he was surrounded by. He was charming. He was definitely the type of guy who wasn't shy about holding back and complimenting women. He's a ladies' man. He compliments them from their head to their toes. "Oh, your hair looks great. I love your style. What a beautiful dress, gorgeous eyes," and the list goes on. There's another thing that I want to mention about going back to school in your 30s, as opposed to starting school in your 20s. It's like you have this new lease on life. Everything's exciting again. It's reminiscent of your younger days. A lot of people get really into this new life they start to experience, especially if they're getting attention from people younger than them. And there was just a lot of temptation around Michelle. As much as he was committed to Yolanda, he started to be very tempted, especially when he met a beautiful 21-year-old young woman named Wendy Trapaga. I'm going to introduce you to her in just a moment. But as Michelle was focusing on school, Yolanda had no idea that he was flirting and being inappropriate in a lot of ways, doing things that she wouldn't exactly approve of while he was away from home. The fact is, he would come home every night to her and have their normal family life together. And I think a lot of people like the aspect of living this double life. having the stability and security to go home with someone that you know will always be there, to cook for you, have sex whenever you want, and to support you. Meanwhile, you can have these exciting encounters, even if they're not sexual, if they're emotional cheating, or just getting close to people in a way that your partner wouldn't exactly approve of. The more time Michelle spent around his temptation, the more he started to let his guard down. But there's something you have to know about him to understand everything that happens going forward. He has never been faithful to any woman that he's ever dated, and this is according to a friend that knows him very well. As a matter of fact, Michelle would brag about the fact that he slept with over 300 women. I don't know if this is true, but a person who brags or uses that as a bragging point, I am judging him here. Yes, I can imagine what kind of guy he is. He also drove a red Ducati motorcycle, and he would drive it up to the beauty school and park outside, take off his helmet. But you know what? Maybe he hadn't found the one yet. I think that all of us can say that we've maybe done things that people wouldn't approve of when it comes to romantic relationships. And as you get older, there's also a sense that you don't have a lot of time to find someone that you're actually extremely genuinely happy with, like that perfect person for you. And in that case, you are more likely to end a relationship because of the prospect of having a happier life for the rest of your life. That could have been what Michelle was facing at this moment, because he's starting to develop an attraction to Wendy. And I want to tell you all about Wendy now, because she wasn't hard to love. She was very lovable, very charismatic and beautiful, probably one of the most beautiful women that Michelle had ever laid eyes on. She's absolutely gorgeous, and she had a personality to match. She was model beautiful, but she didn't have a pretentious attitude. She was humble. And I think it was because of her upbringing and her childhood. So I want to go back to April 29th, 1981. Wendy Marie Trapaga was born to her mother Miriam and her father Ernesto. Her mom was from Colombia, and she moved to the United States in 1979. She started living in Miami, and that's where she met Ernesto, who was a pilot. Miriam was 21 years younger than Ernesto, but they ended up falling in love and settling down in Miami. They got married, and just a couple of years later, Wendy comes into this world. And she was a daddy's girl. She was a sweetie pie, a little angel, and she grew up in a very loving household. Both her mom and her dad doted on her. She was the love of their lives. Ernesto spent a lot of time traveling since he was a pilot, but he was a cargo pilot, so his job wasn't about transporting people, it was about transporting things. And in 1988, Ernesto was working for a company called Egyptian Air Transport. He would fly all around the world, and this time he was in Nigeria. He was transporting a plane full of cows, Mercedes limousines, and a bunch of other stuff. And the type of plane he flew was called a DC-8 cargo plane. He was actually a former Pan Am senior captain, and he was a great pilot. He also had a really fun personality. Someone he worked with said that one time he came to the airport riding his bicycle, and he was in full uniform. His luggage was strapped to his handlebars, and he had this funny, quirky personality. It was March 31st, 1988. Wendy was 6 years old, and she was waiting for her dad to come home from his trip from Egypt. However, this was the day that changed this family forever. Because upon takeoff, Ernie tried to get the plane into the air as usual. As he sped down the runway, the plane would not become airborne. So he went back around and he tried a second time, and devastatingly, the plane caught fire. It was 50 yards from the ground, and it crashed into the desert area around the airport. What was interesting is that this plane was a replacement for another DC-8 that had slid off of a runway just a few days earlier in Denmark, and that plane was on its route to Egypt to pick up the same cargo. That plane was completely damaged, and so this plane was dispatched with a new crew, and it was involved in a fatal crash and destroyed. Even the cows were killed. It was completely heartbreaking, especially for a little 6-year-old girl, and this was Wendy's childhood. This is what she experienced, and you take that with you throughout your life. But a plane crash is something else. It's unrelatable in so many ways, and having to live that fact and retell that story to those you meet and get close to, the loss may be able to be understood, but the circumstances would probably be a little harder. This was the first tragedy for this family, and there will be another, unfortunately. So Ernesto was 61 years old when he died, and it was devastating for Miriam. After Ernesto passed, she was a single mom, and she wanted to provide what she could for her children. So she took a job working at a school as a secretary. And she worked so hard she was able to rise up the ranks and became a supervisor of after-school programs in a Miami-Dade County elementary school. She ends up falling in love again and marrying Juan Benitez. I wasn't sure if her children came from her previous marriage to Ernesto or whether they were coming from Juan Benitez. However, they were a lot older than Wendy, and they did call Wendy their step-sibling. I'm assuming that those children are from her new marriage. It doesn't matter because Wendy wasn't seen as a stepchild, maybe by definition, but they treated her like a blood or biological relative. They were there to step in and raise Wendy, especially her sister Rita. Rita was like a second mother. She was there to teach Wendy everything, and her siblings absolutely adored her because, like I said, she was easy to love. Another thing is they doted on her a lot. It's kind of like she got some extra love because of what happened to her father. And that's okay. Sometimes people need extra love. Their emotions are hard for them to deal with, and they harbor that fear of loss. Wendy grew up not only loving her family, but she adored animals. It didn't matter what kind of animal. It could be a bunny, a puppy, kittens. She loved rescuing animals that were hurt and nursing them back to health. And as a matter of fact, she dreamed of becoming a vet. Unfortunately, she had very bad allergies, and it made it really hard for her to be around animals. Her sister still tried to encourage her to keep going, especially throughout her teens and her high school years. But because of who she was and how pretty she was, she gravitated towards another passion that she had, and that was fashion and beauty. She was the epitome of beauty, with these dark brown eyes and this long, beautiful hair and a smile that just radiated. There was no denying that when she walked into a room, the eyes were on her. The thing about Wendy is that she wasn't full of herself. She wasn't up on some high horse. She was humble, and she cared about others. And as a matter of fact, something that she did stood out to me. She was a senior in high school at the time, and she was saving up money because she wanted to take those gorgeous senior photos. She just wanted them to be perfect. But there was something happening before those pictures, and that was prom. And that could be an even more exciting time in your senior year. And there was a girl at her school that she was close to that couldn't afford a dress to go to prom. So what did Wendy do? She took all the money that she saved, and she went out and bought satin to make a dress for this young girl. And that is the kind of person that she was. She was there to help others and to make them feel important. Not only that, she did her hair and her makeup, and that was part of her passion. She wanted to make people look beautiful. Finally, her sister says, "You know what? You should follow that dream." She decided that right after she graduated from high school, she was going to follow in the footsteps of two of her cousins. Both of them owned beauty salons. Now, I will say this, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but Wendy was married for a very short time after she graduated from high school, but she ended up getting a divorce. So by 21 years old, she is ready to focus on herself. That's why she enrolled at La Belle Beauty Academy in Miami alongside Mr. Michelle Escoto. Now you have to understand that from a 21-year-old's viewpoint, someone like Michelle is pretty fascinating. He carries himself well, he's very charming, he's complimenting her, doting on her. But not only that, he talks about how he's a web designer, he's got a degree in technology. You don't really think that you're going to meet your dream guy at beauty school. A young girl can look up to someone that's 10 years older than her. Because she lost her father, I'm not saying this is a 100% fact, But she could look towards older men as safety. Not exactly to replace her father, of course not, but there is something to say about that. And remember, her mother married someone 20 years older than her. So, it wasn't really out of the ordinary to consider being with an older man. And she was very attracted to Michelle. He didn't exactly act like he was very forthcoming about the fact he already had a girlfriend that he was living with, that had a child that was relying on him to better himself for their future. Instead, he was spending a lot of time with Wendy in class, and he would act different depending on how different women were. For example, with Wendy, he was sensitive, soft-spoken, but there was also this bad boy style about him. He would roll up on his motorcycle, he had this exciting personality, and since Wendy was younger, she sort of matched that vibe. She was out there looking to have a good time, and they just clicked together. He was spending more and more time at school, and Yolanda thought he was working really hard. But instead, he's carrying on. At first, an emotional affair and then a physical affair with Wendy. They had sexual chemistry, they couldn't keep their hands off of each other. They were hooking up at the school, they were going places to hook up together. All the while, Yolanda is sitting at home wondering where Michelle was, because it started to become a very regular thing that he wasn't coming home, even after the time that the classes got out. So she starts wondering what is going on. He had been dating Yolanda for over 2 years. The thing that she didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Michelle had done this. He had always had women on the side this whole time. I don't know how he kept these secrets, but one of these women that he was seeing was even paying for the classes he was taking at beauty school. He couldn't wait to leave in the mornings to run away from Yolanda and into Wendy's arms. It was almost as if he found a younger version of Yolanda. But there was something else, something that was different about Wendy, something that he could confide in her about, something she didn't judge. It was almost as though he was allowed to be himself, and this was all revolving around something he enjoyed sexually. Not only did he have a huge sexual appetite that seemed like it could never be satisfied, and Wendy seemed to match that, which is why they had such a magnetic relationship. They just fit together with their sexual desires and their frequency and the intensity. But it went one step further. They were allowed to see other people. They were swingers. I don't know the story. I don't know if Michelle introduced Wendy to this lifestyle or whether she had always been curious about it, but they discussed it and they decided they wanted to do it. Him and Wendy, they're getting out of class and they're heading to a private swingers club called Miami Velvet. They cater to swingers, being safe in an exclusive environment where you had to be a member to attend these events. This place still exists. I went to the website and there's a member area and it says, "Welcome to Miami Velvet member site." Once you create a profile and you pay, you get access, and then you can see who's coming, what the upcoming events are. So just look right here. These are some of the events, and as you can see, there's a few different ones. There's Assume the Position, Newbie Night, and so on and so forth. It's also sort of a dating site in a way, because you can view people's profiles, then you can meet them online and then in person. Another interesting part of the website, it says that they love tourists, and they say that couples memberships fees will be waived for all first-time tourists that come through. This is Miami, Florida's largest premier swingers club, and people from all over the world actually come to experience this. So, Wendy and Michelle are meeting a lot of strangers, a lot of new people all the time. It's a 20,000 square foot club that looks just like a swanky nightclub. They even have a cruise party where you can go on a mini vacation and hook up with other couples. You're going there expecting to hook up. Here's the main lobby. There are private rooms and open rooms. You can have sex on the couches in front of people or on little beds. You can do whatever you want in an environment where people are sort of, I want to say, vetted. But it's different than just meeting someone randomly at a club and trying to hook up with them, and you're open to different people and they're open to you. Something I did learn about this lifestyle is that they said that the divorce rate is over 50%, and there's a lot of affairs. So some people involved in the swinging lifestyle believe that having more of an open and honest relationship where they can swap partners helps a relationship in many ways. It's up to the person or the couple if they're consensual about it, and that's what they want to do. They're consenting adults, and to each their own. But this is not something that someone like Yolanda would be partaking in. Wendy, either to please Michelle because she liked him so much or because she was genuinely interested in it, went along with this lifestyle. All the while, Wendy doesn't know about Yolanda either, so she thinks she's met this really fun guy showing her the time of her life, maybe opening her eyes to new things sexually. And somehow he's living this double, maybe triple or quadruple life because he's also got other women on the side. It's just a lot for me to take in because somehow he's able to juggle all this plus school. He has a friend he confides in, Ramon, and he talked about how Michelle considered women as sexual conquests. And in the beginning, that's all Wendy was. She was just a young girl that he was flirting with and wanted to have sex with, and that was that. But as time went on, Ramon said that they were like high school sweethearts. It was like they were inseparable. There was this chemistry that you could just feel, and Michelle was falling in love. The thing that he really liked about Wendy, according to Ramon, was that she wasn't pressuring him. She wasn't asking him to marry her or put pressure on him that he had to do things a certain way. That might have been because she was young, or maybe because she had already been in a marriage, and she just wasn't looking for that at the time. But Yolanda starts to get the sense that something isn't right. You can feel when your partner is pulling away. They become distant. They're not doting on you as much. They're not talking to you about their day. They're not even talking about their problems, their wins, their losses, or just their feelings. They sort of become more withdrawn. Sometimes they're irritable with you, and Yolanda was feeling pretty sad about the whole thing. She assumed this was a time for them to be happy as a couple and move forward. But now, it just seemed like they were moving backwards in their relationship. She starts to become a little more determined to find out exactly what's going on. Even though Wendy's not putting much pressure on Michelle, a couple of months went by and she did kind of want to know where the relationship was going. They're not showing people at beauty school that they're together. He's not taking her out on dates during the daytime. She's probably feeling like just a hookup, and that can make you think, what's going on here? Is he going to commit, or are we just going to be hooking up for the rest of this relationship? They're in school together, they have to see each other every day, and that can put you in an awkward position. So I understand why Wendy may have wanted an answer, and this could apply to anyone. But there's something about possessing the manual to be able to say, he's mine. And so the girls at beauty school would stop flirting, and I understand that feeling. You want to claim what's yours, you want to flaunt it around and be proud of it. On the other hand, at home, Yolanda is becoming more like a roommate. They're like two ships passing in the night. They're not passionate, they're not romantic, and it is just totally fizzled out. But Yolanda is holding on as much as she can. She's putting even more pressure on Michelle to kind of fess up to what's going on because she has a sneaking suspicion, and she's right, that he's cheating. She wants to know where he's going, so she starts asking him every time, "Why aren't you going home? Where are you?" She's calling him, he's not answering, and it's too much for him to handle. He begins to break. He doesn't want this relationship anymore. He's determined to break up with Yolanda. He's in love with Wendy, and he wants to be with her. So in August of 2002, Michelle decides to break up with Yolanda, but of course he doesn't say why. When you're in that position, it's hard, it's awkward. Even if you are the type of guy that's cheating and sneaking around and lying, you want to let the person down easily. So he doesn't give her an answer. He pretty much just gets in an argument, takes all his stuff and leaves and never comes back. And Yolanda is stunned. This is the man she thought she was going to marry, and he can just up and leave that easily, in the blink of an eye. They were supposed to be building something together, It was just so sudden, he was gone. So she wants closure. She wants to understand, what did I do wrong? Are you leaving me for someone else? He just denies and stops talking to her. She's heartbroken. She's calling him non-stop for weeks, and he never returns her calls. She becomes desperate to understand, and without getting those answers straight from him, she takes matters into her own hands. And she's trying to guess the password to his voicemail, and she finally gets in. She's playing all of his messages, and that's when she hears a woman's voice. That woman was Wendy. Not only was Wendy leaving a message, but what made Yolanda unable to believe or comprehend, her fathom what she was hearing, is when she heard Wendy say, "Hurry home, hurry home." Yolanda could not believe this. He was living with another girl already. He left her, and he's living with another girl just a few weeks after their breakup. Yes, it's true, they moved in together. And you might be asking yourself, here are two beauty school students. Are they really able to afford a place in Miami Beach? Because, school is like a full-time job. No, they're not even able to afford an efficiency apartment. If you don't know what that is, it's like a bachelor. There's maybe like a sink, a toilet, and one big living space, nothing fancy. It's definitely not living in the lap of luxury. This wasn't South Beach. This was a different part of Miami where you see a little bit more poverty. And sure, they're building their dreams, they're building up their careers, but this worried Wendy's mom. She might be able to understand that Wendy wanted to date this older man. Okay, she did the same thing, but she didn't think that he was good enough for Wendy. She didn't believe they made a good match. But the thing that worried her the most at the time was she found out that Michelle didn't have a job. She didn't know how they were going to even afford the small apartment they were in. All he was doing was attending beauty school. He would talk the talk, but he wouldn't really walk the walk. And it could take 2 years or 3 years until he graduated. So, Miriam just thought this was too fast for them, and they needed to slow down. There was no rush. Why did they have to move in together, especially right away? Because Wendy had been living with her mom and stepdad. She was in a secure and safe environment. She didn't have to pay rent. She could come and go as she pleased. So why then was there something even more worrisome? She found out they didn't even have furniture. And there's nothing lavish or luxurious about sleeping on the cold floor of your apartment. Wendy's family couldn't see the appeal, but they realized that she had a helpful heart. She had been like that since a very young age, and it wasn't like she thought that Michelle was a project boyfriend, but it was as though she wanted to be part of his dreams, to feel that she was building something with him. So, Miriam really didn't want to judge her too harshly, and her daughter was an adult, so she could do whatever she wanted, but she cared about Wendy and she wanted the best for her. But it seemed like they were passionate about the same things. And she could envision that her daughter thought they were going to open this business together. They'd be working side by side, they're going to grow as a couple. In all the other things you think about as a young girl, they're going to get married, have babies together, live happily ever after. But something that Wendy and her family and other people started to notice was that Wendy was frugal. She saved her money, she knew how to make her own clothing, she would wear second-hand items. But her boyfriend, Michelle, he was always spending money. And where was he getting it from? Well, you know that he's seeing other women. One of those women is paying for his lifestyle, and they're probably paying for his rent. All the while, Wendy has no idea where the money is coming from. She probably thinks maybe he has a side job doing things on the computer for technology, or maybe he has savings because he's a 30-year-old man. But Wendy was naive. Wendy is even practicing her hair coloring skills on Michelle. Here's a picture. She bleached his dark hair, platinum blonde for the summer. So, you may or may not believe this, but just 3 months after they had been living together, they decide that they're going to get married. Yeah, and Wendy's mom, she wasn't going to hold back this time. She couldn't believe it. Wendy had already done this before, and she had been divorced. She rushed into things, and now she's doing it again. But being the type of woman Miriam was, As much as she wished that Wendy had fallen in love with someone else, she loved her daughter. She wanted to support her. So she didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. But it was obvious that she was not happy. She did not approve of Michelle. And while I was researching this, I was under the impression, just like Wendy's family, that there was going to be this engagement period where they spend time planning their wedding. Because her first wedding, it was beautiful. It was at a church. She had the beautiful white dress. Everything was like a fairy tale. But that's not exactly what Wendy and Michelle planned. Remember, they don't even have enough money to buy furniture. So how in the world are they going to afford a wedding? Well, they're not. They decide that in October of 2002, they're going to go down to City Hall and get married. That's it. No beautiful ceremony, nothing like that. And Miriam is now pressing Wendy about why she needs to rush into this. And that's when Wendy drops a bombshell on her mom. She tells her that she's pregnant. Now there's mixed emotions in this moment because on one hand, you want so much to go right for your daughter. You want the best life possible for her. On the other hand, you're going to be a grandma. You know you're going to love that child no matter what because you love your own daughter. And you don't want to be disappointed. This isn't the moment for that because it makes it seem like it's negative. They were also a church-going family, so Wendy believed in getting married. She wanted to have a family, and Miriam finds this out just a few days before the marriage. And Miriam kind of thought, you know what, she never experienced that mother-father relationship, family life, so maybe that's what she wanted. She was chasing her own little dream life that she never got to have. So on Thursday, October 10th, 2002, Michelle and Wendy were married at the Miami Beach City Hall. Even though they didn't have a lavish wedding, and I mean, they look beautiful, here's the photo, they wanted to have a beautiful honeymoon. They didn't want to go far, probably because they couldn't afford it, but they wanted to feel like they were in a place that was exotic. So they went to Key West, Florida. It's an island off of South Florida. It's about 90 miles from Cuba, and it's known for their cute little pastel-colored conch-style homes, scuba diving. It's a great vacation destination. It's also very romantic. It's the perfect place for a honeymoon. It's around a 3 or 4 hour drive. So they set out on Friday, October 11th, just a day after their marriage. They planned to be gone the entire weekend and come back to Miami by Sunday evening. Wendy saw her mom before the trip. She gives her a hug goodbye, and her mom says be safe, and Wendy says she'll be back by Sunday. The couple spent the first 2 days enjoying their time together as husband and wife. They stayed in a nice hotel, probably watched the sunset, had a few drinks, romantic dinners. By Sunday, October 13th, as planned, they were headed back to Miami, but they weren't ready to let the fun end. They still wanted to celebrate, so Michelle decides to get a fancy hotel suite at the Miami Executive Hotel that night. This hotel is known for romantic-themed rooms called fantasy suites. Of course, I'm going to show you. There's one here with a red heart-shaped jacuzzi and other romantic amenities. This is their style, though. There's also rooms like the jungle room, the cave with its own pool. Quite a nice little surprise for Wendy. She's excited. She calls her mom, and she lets her know that they're going to be back in Miami, but they're extending their honeymoon one extra night and would be coming home the next day. She explained that they had plans to go to dinner, then see a movie, maybe go out dancing at a Miami nightclub. Miriam was kind of worried because Wendy was pregnant, so this time she did pipe up and tell her not to drink alcohol. From what we can understand at this point, Wendy loves to be spontaneous. She likes to party. She enjoys spicing things up romantically, and Michelle encourages it. So they go out to dinner, they go to a movie, then they check into their hotel at around midnight. They spend the next few hours enjoying one another in their hotel suite. Seems like a night like the one they planned is exactly what they would want to do to end their little honeymoon vacation. Except they're not in the comfort and safe zone of their swingers club. They're on the town, surrounded by strangers, consuming alcohol, getting a bit wild. And maybe this was a big mistake. Maybe they should have just gone home, because this would be Wendy's the last night on Earth. She just didn't know that yet. It's around 5:30 on Monday morning. Miriam is woken up by the sound of her phone ringing. It startled her, and when she looked at the clock and realized how early it was in the morning, her heart sank. She had a really bad feeling right away. In that split second before she picked up the receiver, many thoughts flew through her mind, and most of them were about Wendy. She didn't know what to expect when she picked up the phone. She said, "Hello," and she heard a voice she recognized on the other end, but it's not her daughter's voice. It was the voice of her daughter's new husband, Michelle. He asked her if Wendy was there with her, and she's confused. Why would Wendy be with her? She was supposed to be with him on their honeymoon. What's going on? Miriam tells him that she hadn't spoken to Wendy since the day before, when they were on their way back to Miami. Miriam wants to know what happened last night. Where was Wendy last? And when did Michelle see her? He explains they were out drinking, and Wendy wanted to continue, but he was worried about her drinking while pregnant. They got into a back and forth about it, and there was a lot of tension between them. It was their first official disagreement. They were arguing in the car. When they parked at their apartment, he decided to go inside to cool off. They both needed a breather. When he came out 5 to 10 minutes later, she was not there. He didn't know where she went. He called and called, but got no answer. That's why he called Miriam, thinking if anyone would know where she was, it would be her mother. Miriam's worried. Her daughter is pregnant and alone somewhere, missing, not answering calls. This was not right. So they wait to see if she ends up reaching out to them. Maybe she was upset. She needed a break, and she was with friends. They didn't want to immediately jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to because this was out of character for her. A couple of hours later, Michelle still hadn't heard from Wendy. So he drove over to the school that Miriam works at, and he's waiting outside for her to meet him. He's a complete mess, distraught, worried, scared, and he wants to know what they're going to do next. They decide once again to wait. It wasn't long before they would know exactly where Wendy was, and they probably wished that they would never have found out because the reality was worse than they could have ever imagined. Backing up the timeline here, at 6 a.m., Miami-Dade police receive a phone call from a sanitation worker. He was doing his routine rounds in a commercial warehouse lot in northwest Dade County when he saw something odd on the ground of the parking lot between two vehicles. It looked out of place, and as he approached to take a closer look, he realized he was looking at a dead body. In response, the police quickly send out 2 homicide detectives, Maria Medeiros and Gus Baez. When they got to the scene, police had already taped off the entire area where the vehicles are. As they walked up, they saw the body of a woman wearing a blue party dress. She was lying on her stomach in a pool of blood, and this was a gruesome scene. Upon their initial investigation, they noticed blood spatter on a vehicle, and they took note of that. They thought the crime had been committed right there in the parking lot. They still weren't sure what the cause of death was, because no one could move the body until the crime scene technicians arrived with the medical examiner. However, they were taking in everything they could at the scene in order to make a preliminary determination of what could have happened here. Because of how desolate this area was, they wondered if this could be a drug deal gone bad. This area was known to be a meeting place for those types of transactions, or it could be a robbery. With the way the woman was dressed, she could have been a target for thieves, and perhaps it went from bad to worse. They tried to think of where a woman would have been dressed like this. A club, maybe? So they got to thinking about tourists and other people that she could have come in contact with. Could she have been taken by force and forced against her will to have intercourse with someone? These were all working theories. This is not the safest place for a woman to be roaming around by herself. The CSI team arrives, and that is when the detectives get a shock that they were not expecting. As though the scene wasn't shocking enough, when they turn the woman over onto her back, they're staring at a body without a face. Her face was beaten to the point it was no longer recognizable. She had wounds all over her neck as well, and with the amount of injuries that she sustained, they knew that this was not from someone's fists. She was hit with something heavy, but there was nothing around the scene that looked as though it had been used as a weapon. However, it didn't take long to identify her. Her driver's license and other identification were found next to her body. Of course, they would have to get the autopsy report, but the woman without a face was the once gorgeous, vivacious, compassionate, and kind woman that we know as Wendy Trepaga. How could this happen? How could she have been living the happiest moments of her life and then end up like this? The next step detectives had to take was to notify Wendy's mother, and as I say every time, they reported that this was the worst part of the job. It never gets easier. And when they told her, Miriam was out of her mind with grief, with sadness and shock. She was bawling. She had lost her husband tragically, and now their daughter just ripped out of her life in the blink of an eye. The detectives spend time with Miriam, consoling her and being there for her. But what they really needed was to gain insight into who her daughter was and what she was doing before she was killed. Miriam said that when Wendy called on Sunday evening, she sounded just fine. She was happy, excited to be on her honeymoon, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As detectives are talking to Miriam, her phone rings. She answered it, and it's Michelle calling again, asking if she had heard from Wendy. Miriam can't speak. She doesn't know how she's going to break the news to Wendy's new husband of 4 days that his wife is dead. Instead, one of the detectives grabs the phone. They don't want to tell him over the phone, so they tell him they're about to head over to his apartment. Michelle wants to know what is going on. They aren't too far from his place, so they say, "Hang tight, we'll be right there." But when they arrive and he lets them in, he just blurts out, "Is she dead?" And I know you might think that's weird, but when you hear that detectives don't want to tell you something over the phone, and your wife is missing, and they're on the way to your apartment, it's pretty much a given. But they give him the heartbreaking news about his wife, and he just starts to bawl his eyes out. They can tell he's in shock. The first thing they ask him is if he knows anyone who would want to harm Wendy, and he says no, he has no idea. They give him a few minutes so he can calm down, and then they ask him to come to the station so that they can get additional information. When asked what happened leading up to the morning of October 14th, he tells them about their marriage, about the Key West honeymoon, and that Wendy wasn't exactly ready to go home yet. It was still the weekend. She wanted to extend their fun, spice things up by getting a hotel at the Executive to just have a romantic night. He said that after checking out of the other hotel in Key West, they took the long drive to Miami. They had dinner, they went to a movie, they got to the Executive pretty late, like around midnight. They had sex, they took a nap together, and then Wendy went to the jacuzzi and she was kind of relaxing and dozing off here and there. When they checked out of the hotel that morning, that's when they got into the disagreement revolving around Wendy drinking while she was pregnant. While they're going back and forth, Wendy informs him that she's not actually pregnant. What? And this is according to him. They didn't get the autopsy report back, but it's bound to give them concrete information about whether or not this was true. So he says, upon hearing Wendy say this, the discussion definitely got more heated. They were close to their apartment, and Michelle wanted both of them to cool down, so he left her in the car and went inside to compose himself. He was also trying to keep the noise down because it was really early in the morning. It was like 4 a.m., and he didn't want to disturb the neighbors. About 5 to 10 minutes later, he comes back outside to see why Wendy hadn't come in. That's when he noticed her car was gone, and she was nowhere in sight. He figured she went over to her mother's, and that's why he called Miriam to see if she had shown up. They questioned him for 14 hours, and when I hear this, I can't imagine being in this like 10 by 10 room just answering questions, and they kept asking him the same one over and over again. Do you know anyone that would want to kill Wendy? After the interview was done, Michelle needed someone. He turned to his friend Ramon, who I mentioned earlier. When he arrived at Ramon's, he was disheveled. He looked sad, upset, down, and tired. Within the next couple of days, the autopsy report comes back. Wendy had 15 to 20 wounds on her face and neck. She was struck with a hard object, completely destroying the structure of her face. And they have reason to believe that she was killed at the scene where she was found. They revealed that she had also been strangled, and that's usually a personal crime, although it can also be a crime of control and dominance. Plus, they find someone else's DNA on Wendy's dress. Her car is also found nearby. A toxicology report was conducted, and they found alcohol, sleeping pills, painkillers, and anti-anxiety medication in her bloodstream. Her time of death was determined to be between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. She wasn't wearing shoes, but her feet weren't dirty, and that puzzled detectives. There were no defensive wounds to her arms or her legs, and this indicated that she was most likely either unconscious or restrained in some way when she was attacked by the murderer. But there was something else they confirmed. Remember the claim that Wendy was not pregnant? Well, the coroner determined that was correct. Wendy was not pregnant at the time of her death. So, why did she tell her mother that she was there? There were a lot of questions left unanswered. Did she leave her apartment and then go somewhere and consume alcohol and drugs, and meet up with someone who carried out this heinous crime? That was the newest theory that detectives were working through. The reason? Well, the scene of the crime was only a mile away from, guess where? Miami Velvet Swingers Club. Could she have left Michelle and sought comfort in someone else? Someone that she had met at the club on another occasion, or someone she was talking to? After all, they were technically allowed to hook up with other people, but usually this meant when they were together with other couples. Not on their own, but sometimes this lifestyle comes with temptations outside the boundaries that the couple set. So detectives are very interested in this club, as well as everyone who attends the events that could have come in contact with Wendy any time that she had been there in the past. And who was there on the night she was killed? You have a club where people explore their deepest desires, and many of us know there are sexual deviants that prey on women like Wendy. So they head over to interview the owner of the club, and he agrees to allow them to take DNA tests of all the employees, as well as all the people that patronize the establishment. As they wait on those results, they bring Michelle back in, and he confirms that it's true. The couple did live the swingers lifestyle. They were involved sexually with other individuals. They also get a subpoena for both Michelle's and Wendy's phone records. That's a normal part of the procedure. They need to piece together the past few months of Wendy's life. They want to know anyone the couple had contact with. Meanwhile, 5 days following Wendy's death, her family and friends gather at the cemetery to pay their respects and to lay Wendy to rest. It's a very emotional day for them, especially for her mom and her 4 older siblings. As the family is mourning the loss of their beloved Wendy, investigators have a new lead. It comes from Michelle's phone records. He called a number at 3:15 a.m. The morning of the crime. They traced this number back to a pager. Whose does it belong to? His ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. Well, they don't know who this is or how they're connected to Michelle. At this point, they notice that there are a number of calls between both of them in the weeks leading up to Wendy's murder. I wasn't surprised. He's a cheater. Nothing has changed. He wants his cake and his ice cream on the side. But detectives want to know more. They call Yolanda in for questioning. What you're about to hear is probably going to blow you away, or maybe not, but stay tuned because this case gets more and more convoluted and unbelievable. When they call her, she wants to know why they need to talk to her. They ask her what her connection is to Michelle, and she asks, "What is this all about?" They tell her the news about Wendy, that she's Michelle's wife and that she was found murdered just a few blocks from Yolanda's home. She tells them that she's Michelle's ex-girlfriend and friend. She willingly comes in for questioning. Her version of events goes like this. She tells detectives she knows of Wendy, but she doesn't know Wendy personally. She explains Michelle left her for Wendy. They want to know details, so she goes back to the beginning of their relationship and tells them everything we already know, but more, the things that were going on behind the scenes, things that poor Wendy was oblivious to. She tells him that she's still madly in love with Michelle. She was heartbroken, destroyed that he left so abruptly, and she was desperate for answers. That's all she wanted to know, what he was doing and why. So she admits she hacked into his voicemail and listened to all Wendy's messages, starting with the one that infuriated her from the beginning, the one where Wendy alluded to the couple living together. She explained she couldn't believe they had been cheating, but that he was already living with someone else. She goes on further to explain that he wouldn't answer her calls, but finally, in the fall of that year, 2002, a few months after Michelle had left, he finally answered his phone when she rang him. And when he picked up, she just blurted out questions that she wanted answers to. And Michelle admitted he was seeing another woman. But he swore, according to Yolanda, that he wasn't in love with Wendy. Now these are Yolanda's words and her version of how things played out, but by all of their accounts, Michelle was very much in love with Wendy. So did Yolanda have a reason to lie? Yolanda insists that Michelle told her that he was actually still in love with her and that he was thinking of getting back together. Then why was he carrying on and advancing his relationship with Wendy? Was he that much of a cheater that he would just string all these women along? Well, he was, and Yolanda said she believed him. She was so desperate to get him back into her life that she began talking to him every day in hopes that she could rekindle their love. She forgave him. She just wanted him back, no matter what it took. He talked about being able to start his own business soon, and soon enough, Michelle was actually meeting up with Yolanda and carrying on his usual double life. She was also giving him money. They asked Yolanda when she and Michelle hung out last, and she says, "Oh, it was just a few days ago." So they asked, what was that meetup all about? And she told them that he actually asked her to watch his dogs that weekend. They pressed her, asking if she knew he was married because it sounded kind of confusing. Yolanda couldn't possibly believe that Michelle was going to get back with her if he was literally married to another woman. They think that she's lying to them. They asked her where she was that weekend, with an emphasis on what she was doing the morning the crime occurred. The proximity to the crime scene was very suspicious to investigators. She said she was at home. They asked her, "Well, can anyone confirm this?" And she said her family was staying with her. They could vouch for her whereabouts. They asked her if she got a page from Michelle at 3 a.m. on October 14th, the morning Wendy was found dead, and she admits she did, but she never responded because she was taking care of her sick daughter. Michelle knew that her daughter was sick, and the whole weekend he had been checking in on her and Yolanda in case they needed anything. Oh, he's such a nice guy, right? They check out her alibi and it seems legit. After that, they let Yolanda go. She can't help them with anything else at this point, but they're very interested in digging deeper into who Yolanda was. They're kind of at a dead end because they don't have any concrete evidence. There's no conclusive DNA linking anyone to the crime, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, no weapon, nothing. The killer could be anyone, and they could be long gone from Miami at this point. So they turn to Ramon. To sum up his opinion of Yolanda, he says she isn't a good person, she was drama, and he didn't really care for her from the beginning. Another clue is discovered at this point in the investigation. They get word that something's missing from Wendy's trunk, a tire iron. Yes, a tire iron, a heavy object that could certainly cause the injuries that Wendy sustained. They're pretty sure that that's the murder weapon, but where is it? Now they know someone either brought Wendy to the warehouse parking lot unconscious or by force, or she willingly drove there but was forced out of her car and killed with an item that was readily available in the moment. So was this planned, or was this a crime of passion that happened out of nowhere with the killer grabbing anything they could to harm Wendy. Not only that, as the investigation went deeper into Yolanda and Michelle's affair, they found out Michelle made a number of calls to Yolanda in the hours leading up to the murder. And get this, one of these calls was a block away from the crime scene. They begin to piece together a theory. Maybe Michelle's story checks out, but there's something missing. Maybe he did get into a heated argument when he found out that Wendy was lying about being pregnant. Why would she do this? Maybe to get Michelle to agree to a quick wedding, to get him to commit. And then, when Michelle learned of this fact, he got enraged. He drove her to that parking lot and he beat her to death. But they don't have any evidence to link him to the crime. They'd have to find a way to prove that this was true. About 2 months following Wendy's murder, something Michelle does piques investigators' interest enough to make him their prime suspect. He tried to collect a life insurance policy that was taken out on Wendy's life. However, the insurance company refuses to grant him the funds. Is this suspicious? Yes, but it doesn't mean he murdered Wendy. Many couples take out life insurance policies. But they need to know more. They turn back to Wendy's family and they ask, "Did you know about the life insurance?" And it turns out Miriam was aware of it. She told them that she thought it was weird they had no children and they rushed into marriage, and now they've got life insurance. But what was really mind-blowing was the amount, $1 million. Now investigators realize Michelle had 1 million reasons to want his new bride dead. Miriam also explains that she never had a good feeling about Michelle. He had a temper, he was arrogant, and she had actually seen him get angry and throw his motorcycle helmet to the ground. This wasn't even over anything extreme. It was a normal, everyday inconvenience, and he made it into something more. She witnessed her sweet, innocent daughter just standing there, stunned, because Wendy didn't witness that type of anger, and she didn't know how to respond. She loved Michelle, so she let it go. Investigators go back and they dig even deeper. They find out Michelle had more secrets, and they weren't just about other affairs. He had a criminal record. Several years before, he was arrested and charged for armed robbery. He went into a pharmacy and he tried to get the employees to hand over whatever was in the register, as well as prescription medications and anything else he could get his hands on. In addition to those charges, he had a concealed weapons charge and another one for fleeing from officers. Was he hiding something else? Something even more sinister? The murder of his own wife? That's what investigators are getting closer and closer to finding out. Before they can bring the law down on Mr. Michele Escoto, he brings the law down upon the insurance company. He sues them. That's right, he's used to getting his way, and when this company wouldn't comply, well, he took matters into his own hands. But when his family found out, they joined with the insurance company in a civil suit to block Michelle from receiving a dime. They believed he killed Wendy, and they're going to do anything they can to stop this man from thriving. I would do the same thing. Money can make people do crazy things, like bring a lawsuit against an insurance company. But does it mean that he did away with the supposed love of his life for money? Not necessarily. There wasn't proof. Besides, they both took out million-dollar life insurance policies on one another. If he was truly grieving her loss, couldn't he believe it would be unfair to lose what he believed he bargained for before her death, with her consent, as though it was a wish that she had for him in case anything happened to her, for better or worse? But why Wendy and not Yolanda or any of the other women that he was seeing? They were all alive and well. And to top it off, if he was guilty, would he really be so overtly bold to implicate himself by bringing such a public lawsuit? Wendy's family said, yeah, because he's that narcissistic. As the lawsuit is pending, time is going by, there still was no justice done for Wendy. A year after her death, a tribute to Wendy appeared in the Miami Herald newspaper, written on behalf of her family, and I want to read it to you. Wendy, you were such a beautiful gift to this world, and now 1 year after your senseless death, we realize how the memory of you is so deeply etched into our hearts. Your name is synonymous with love, compassion, altruism, and hope. You were known as a daughter, sister, aunt, niece, granddaughter, and true friend. In your wake, you leave a huge void that can only be partially filled with warm remembrance from the many lives you have touched. Your existence will never be forgotten. We are consoled only in knowing that you are now with God and with your beloved Poppy, whom you missed so greatly. May you rest peacefully, sweet Wendy. Now, I need to take you back to the civil suit with MetLife Insurance being sued by Michelle. Now you see, in order to collect the money, he has to tell his version of what happened to his wife under oath in a deposition, and I happen to have part of that deposition video. I want to play it for you because it's the first time you're ever going to hear from Michelle himself. You can tell me what you think about his demeanor, his answers, and his version of the events as they were unfolding. According to him,
As you sit here today, sir, do you know anybody that wanted to kill Wendy?
No,
You know anybody that had any reason to kill Wendy?
I did not know anyone that had any reason for Wendy. No.
Now, when you left the Miami Executive Hotel, was that sometime around 3 in the morning?
I do not remember that. It was the wee hours of the morning.
And then you left here and you went, your intention was to drive to your Miami Beach apartment, correct?
Correct.
And on the way there, you called Yolanda.
Correct.
And you called her on her beeper, correct?
Negative. I do not believe I called her a beeper. No. I believe I called her her cell phone.
On her cell phone?
I do believe. I could be mistaken, but that's the best that I can remember.
Okay. And you weren't able to speak with Yolanda, correct?
That is correct.
now investigators are listening to what he's saying under oath in the deposition, and they're comparing it to what he said during the investigation, and they're finding inconsistencies all over the place. Was she drinking? Was she not drinking? Whether she was driving or not driving, it just started to unravel and make him look very guilty, and now they're 100% convinced that they have their killer. Because of this,
When you arrived in your apartment in Miami Beach, you walked out of the car, correct? When you
Correct.
stayed in the car. Correct. Did you stay at any time in the car arguing with Wendy?
We were talking in the car, yes, for a little bit.
You were talking or arguing?
Very light argument, I would say, due to the time of the day, the time of the night. Had it been earlier in the day, it would have probably been more of a heated argument. But we were trying, I was trying to keep it low-key for the neighbors.
And on the way to the apartment in Miami Beach, you two argued on the way there, correct?
I think it got a little more heated once we're like on the beach and like getting to the house. It was less of an argument on the way over. I would definitely characterize it as much less.
And when you left the car that morning, Wendy was sitting in the passenger seat, correct?
Correct.
So you took the keys and you went directly into the apartment, correct? Why did you come out after 5 minutes?
I wanted to talk, I go to the car, go to my wife's.
Okay. Was Wendy gone at that time?
Yes.
Do you recall calling Yolanda that morning before you were interrogated by the police?
I don't have a recollection of speaking with her, but I most likely did.
Why would you have called?
Most likely to complain. To bitch.
About Wendy?
Most likely not about her, about what had happened, about her taking off.
prosecutors actually decide that they have enough evidence to arrest Michelle and charge him for the murder of his wife Wendy. Yes, of course, it's all circumstantial, but they have an inkling that Yolanda knows more than what she's told them. They think she's covering for Michelle because, like she said, she's in love with him, almost obsessed with getting him back, and she was a scorned lover. Seems like she would have something against Wendy. So wouldn't that mean she would hide the secrets of her lover? At this point, 3 years after Wendy's murder, and while the lawsuit was still ongoing, Michelle decides he's going to drop the case against MetLife Insurance. But because Wendy's family filed against Michelle, that money was in escrow until everything was settled. If Michelle was found guilty during the murder trial, the money would go to Wendy's family. And you're probably not going to believe this, But the case gets even more twisted as time goes on. Michelle and Yolanda start dating again. They had gotten back together after Wendy's murder. But with everything going on and Michelle being charged with murder, their relationship was kind of on the rocks. This was an opportunity for investigators to jump in and try to get Yolanda to talk. In 2005, Yolanda was brought in again. Now here's the thing. They had more evidence at this point, something to make her crack. They presented her with documents proving that she paid for the executive Miami hotel stay, not Michelle. This means that their little rendezvous, their little escapade before the end of their honeymoon, wasn't his idea, and it wasn't Wendy's idea. Now what are you going to say, Yolanda? Why are you paying for your ex-boyfriend's hotel room for him and his new wife to have a sexual encounter? Something doesn't add up. Investigators told her, no matter what she wanted to do, they were going to subpoena her and make her testify in court. So she better fess up to what's going on, because if she knows more than she's telling them, there's going to be trouble for Yolanda. At this point, she implicates Michelle in Wendy's murder. She said it all started that fall day when she confronted him about hearing a voice message. This is when she says he told her he's not in love with Wendy, he's in love with her, and he wants to be back with Yolanda. It gets even more wicked. She says he told her he has a plan for them to get back together. As time went on, Yolanda finds out Wendy's pregnant. This causes a complete storm. She's sitting there thinking, this man's gonna come back to me, we're gonna be together again. But now his girlfriend's pregnant. What does that mean for Yolanda and Michelle? He tries to convince her, I can't leave now. That's just not a possibility. I've got to marry her, but I have a reason. 1 million reasons, to be exact. She tells investigators he insists he's only marrying Wendy because of a $1 million life insurance policy on her. He says he doesn't even care about Wendy, that he's going to get rid of her, and as soon as he does, he'll come back, and they'll live the life they've always dreamed about. I know most of us won't understand this because we're not in that situation. But Yolanda is sick. When I say sick, I mean lovesick. She's love-struck. All the things women are who are manipulated by these narcissistic abusers. There's no excuse for what happens next, but in her twisted, manipulative situation with this man, she thinks loves her. She basically says, I'll support you with whatever it takes. Now prosecutors know this woman knew. She knew, and she did not go to the authorities. Could she know more? Could she be involved? They're threatening her with this information. She insists she has nothing to do with what happened. Yes, she knew what he was going to do. Essentially, he dropped off the apartment. She watched him on the honeymoon, which is when Michelle said he was going to carry out this murder, but Yolanda said it didn't go as planned. The original plan had a different timeline and location, but it didn't work. That's when he decided on another plan. Originally, when they first talked about getting rid of Wendy, he said he was going to take her on a vacation to New Orleans, though she was somehow going to make it look like an accident. They were going to go to Mardi Gras, and she was going to die. All they had to do was wait and collect the insurance and then ride off into the sunset together. Even though Yolanda was in the state of mind she was in, believing that Michelle was going to do this and come back to her, she still couldn't stand the thought of him with another woman, marrying her and potentially having a baby with another woman. I can't believe she would even stand for that. But I guess if you're going to gain $1 million with a man you think loves you, you'll do anything. Then things take a little bit of a turn. Yolanda decides to get a lawyer, and she stops talking to the investigators. Since they don't have any concrete evidence against Yolanda at this point, they're still building a case against Michelle. They let her go. It's not until a year later in 2006 when Yolanda's attorneys decide to talk to prosecutors and say, here's the deal. Yolanda knows way more than she's telling you, but she's not willing to tell you anything unless she's granted full immunity. Prosecutors need that information. They need it. They want to put this man behind bars. So they agree to give Yolanda immunity. And I have to say this bothers me in so many ways, and you'll find out more about that later. But I understand the concept, however. It's definitely been questioned many times in this case. But what made it so compelling is that she marched right into the state attorney's office with her lawyers and told them that she took Michelle away from the scene of the crime that night. This is a nail in the coffin. The jury would be very compelled to find him guilty if someone actually witnessed him coming from the scene. Obviously, there had to be an exchange or conversation, or something must have happened between Michelle and Yolanda, so she knows a lot about that night and they need her. They don't have a weapon, they don't have anything but Yolanda. But they have this witness they grant immunity to. But as you probably know in life, we always say there are two sides to every story, and maybe there's 3 sides, 4, or more. We'll never know 100% what happened, but wait until you hear Yolanda's version of events. But none of these stories are going to come out anytime soon. 12 years go by. 12 years after Wendy's murder, Michelle is finally going to trial. And of course, he pleads not guilty. Wait until you hear the prosecutor's argument. This is probably one of the most twisted, heartbreaking, and evil cases I've ever researched. Especially because we hear from Michelle himself, not because he decides to take the stand and testify in his own defense. No, even worse, he decides to represent himself. I guess being in prison or wherever he was the last 12 years, he learned a little about the law, and maybe in his perspective he learned enough to be a better attorney and defend himself better than a real criminal defense lawyer. So in April of 2014, 42-year-old Michelle Escoto represents himself and his first witness, Miriam Benitez, Wendy's own mother, and she had to look this man in the eye and answer questions from him. And here you hear the prosecutor talking about the reasons he would do this.
Money is the root of this defendant's evil. He would prey on an unsuspecting 21-year-old girl and marry her 4 days after that marriage. This defendant bludgeoned and strangled Wendy Trepava to death.
Along with the argument and the theory and the alleged reason, the theory about why and how he targeted a gullible and naive Wendy from the beginning, knowing all along he was going to kill her. That was his plan from day one. And now we have poor Miriam. She had to take the stand and use an interpreter. She explained what I told you before, how shocked she was that Wendy and Michelle were taking out life insurance policies on one another.
No me sentí bien. I did not feel good. I expressed to her, why insurance? They're not even married. They didn't have children. Why insurance?
She just didn't understand the need for it. Now, one of the detectives I talked about before, Maria, she gets on the stand and she talks about why she believed that Michelle was guilty from the beginning.
I told him if he couldn't muster up a tear for his wife for 4 days, to muster up a tear for the $1 million he's never going to see.
What was his reaction?
When she's asked that last question, she puts her arms across her chest. She's crossing them and giving a smug look on her face, the way that she said she saw Michelle do that day. She wasn't sure if the way he reacted was the callous indifference he had towards Wendy herself, that she just wasn't worth anything, or whether he just thought women were worthless because it seemed like all he used them for was his own benefit. And you'll hear more about this from the women that he used who are luckily still alive to tell their stories. Here is one of his former girlfriends who gets on the stand and talks about how she was giving him money every month. This is what she did.
How much money did you give him a month?
Approximately maybe 1,500.
This is what he did. He manipulated these women. He charmed them and made them believe he was in love with them, just like he did with Yolanda. All of these women were willing to do something for him. Was Yolanda willing to kill for him? That was one of the questions I had. $1,500 a month this woman was giving him. That's unbelievable. I just don't know how he does it. And of course we know that there is yet another woman supporting him for years, Yolanda, and she's the prosecution's star witness. She gets on that stand and she has to answer questions from her former lover, the man that she's testifying against, and it gets emotional. I want you to take a good hard look at Yolanda, and I want to hear from you, because when I look at her, to me, there's something missing. There's something that doesn't add up to me, and I want your thoughts on what you're about to hear.
Yolanda Cerrillo, have you ever had a man that you could share your life with?
I thought it was Michelle.
She thought that she was going to spend the rest of her life with Michelle until she found out that he pretty much exchanged her for a younger version when he met Wendy. Tell me you don't think that this woman was enraged. Tell me you don't think this woman would take it upon herself to do something about it. Here's the important part that I told you about before, the story Michelle gave her allegedly about how he didn't even love Wendy, and it was all about Yolanda and the plan for them to be together.
He said to calm down, that it was all a plan, that he didn't love her, he loved me. He was gonna marry her, they were gonna have an insurance policy, and she was gonna die.
All right, so he told you he had a plan.
Yes.
Now wait, because it gets worse. Yes, of course, she's admitting to the whole courtroom like she did to investigators that she knew about this plan and she was okay with it. She was okay with the love of her life taking another woman's life. It could have been her, but no, she felt like she was winning. But there's more. She admits that not only did she know, she actually helped formulate this plan. Yeah, it wasn't a surprise to me when I was watching these clips of the trial. She actually went through the motions as though she was Wendy, and they tried out these various ways they could possibly get Wendy to die. That is completely sick. She let this man try out versions of how he was ultimately going to carry out his new wife's murder. Why do I get the impression that this woman was the one that came up with a plan? Why do I get the feeling that there's more to this plan of Michelle's, that she's guiding him? In her own words, she was giving him better suggestions and they're practicing it to try to figure out how they can get it just right. Can you imagine? And I guess another question I had was, did Michelle do this? Was he really there at her apartment practicing these things, or was this just a lie? Was it her imagination, her obsessive thoughts, that she actually thought she was planning this with Michelle, but in reality, she was just planning it by herself? It definitely crossed my mind because she's not in her right mind. Would Michelle really do this? I think it's more plausible that they figured this out together because he was the one that had access to Wendy. Yolanda didn't. But doesn't it seem more realistic that Yolanda would be angry at Michelle and angry at Wendy and try to concoct a plan? But now you're about to hear her talk about all of this and how it comes together, how they planned to use Percocet to drug Wendy because it would be easier to drown her. And apparently, there was that other plan they concocted about New Orleans, but it was taking too long, and therefore he had to rush the marriage. I'm going to come back to that because there's this little caveat that I want to bring up that I think is really sickening. If obviously this isn't sickening enough, there's a caveat having to do with the pregnancy, but I want to focus your attention on another snag in their plans that she's about to talk about right now. It was the fact that they were in Key West having fun together, and he puts these Percocet, allegedly in her drink, but she doesn't drink it because it doesn't taste good. So he ends up waiting, holding on to the rest of this concoction, and then putting it into one of her drinks that she was having at the Executive Hotel when they're having this romantic time. And she's in the heart-shaped jacuzzi that night. He actually gets her to take the drugs according to Yolanda. Now, the problem was, even though Wendy's in this haze, apparently, and I don't know why, I don't know how this was impossible because this is a big man, you see him, you see his stature. He was way bigger than Wendy, but he's somehow unable to drown her. He got her to take the drugs, but drowning her didn't work out right. So Yolanda says he shows up at her apartment in the middle of the night. Now, was this in regard to that 3 o'clock in the morning page that she got, that she allegedly didn't respond to, and he just drove over because she wasn't answering? Well, apparently according to her, he shows up. When he comes to the door, this is what she said she saw outside in the vehicle.
Did you see anything in the passenger seat? I saw a movement. Somebody inside the car.
Imagine knowing that this young girl, as a mother. Imagine as a mother knowing that someone's daughter, someone's precious love of their life that they gave birth to, that they raised until they were 21 years old. Can you imagine knowing that they're still alive, but that they're about to die? I cannot imagine someone being so heartless that they can't even step into someone else's shoes, another mother's shoes, another human being's shoes, and realize that this is wrong. She could have stopped this at any moment, but she chose not to. Instead, according to her, he said, "Follow me," and they drove to the warehouse. And when they got there, this is what she said happened.
And then what happened? He got out of the car, he walked over to my car, and he told me, drive around, give me 20 to 25 minutes.
21 years of life taken in 20 minutes. Imagine waiting around those 20 minutes knowing that someone's life is being extinguished, that she's being bludgeoned and strangled just feet away from you and you do nothing. Finally, she says that she sees the love of her life covered in blood with a tire iron in his hand, just walking down the street. He gets in her car, they drive to Biscayne Bay, and he throws the tire iron into the water. And she watches this happen.
And as he's walking, I saw him when he threw the thing in the water.
What I think is really interesting here, because I pay attention to semantics, she acts like she doesn't know what the weapon is. She doesn't know what a tire iron is. And okay, maybe some of us don't. But here's the thing. She's known about this case for 12 years. You're bound to know what kind of weapon he used. In my mind, I'm thinking, wouldn't it benefit her if she acted as though, oh, she didn't even realize what it was that he threw into the water? I feel she had way more to do with this plan. Perhaps she was the mastermind or even the perpetrator herself, so wouldn't it make sense for her to distance herself from the weapon? Oh, he just threw something in the water. I found that to be so interesting, that choice of words that she used. Then, according to her, she drives him home to the apartment that he shared with the woman that he just killed, and she takes his bloody clothing and she throws it away in a dumpster. If this really happened, why didn't the forensic team go to her car and find blood? That was a fact I never heard about in this case, and I'm thinking, okay, I know so many years have gone by, I don't know when they found that out. But even if they knew she was a witness, a potential witness like a year later or not even, wouldn't they go and do that anyway? Isn't that something that they would search, because it would solidify this whole story? Then the prosecutor asked if she feels good about what she did. This is her response.
Happy with yourself? No. I'm worthless. That's how I feel right now.
Is this about you?
No, it's not. There's about a mother who lost her daughter and I had something to do with it.
Unbelievably, like I said before, something I've never seen before, is that she's about to be confronted by Michelle himself, even though Michelle represented himself. He had a standby lawyer, a real criminal defense lawyer helping him, and that attorney, he wasn't just saying this, he truly believed that Michelle wasn't the killer. There might have been bad qualities about Michelle, but he believed it was 100% Yolanda that was responsible for this crime. This defense lawyer also had a lot of issues with the circumstantial evidence that the state had, and that their star witness was a woman who was a lover scorned. And in a lot of people's minds, if they were being charged with a crime like this, they wouldn't represent themselves, that they were guilty. Some people are calling him a narcissist. But let's say he really was innocent. Maybe he wouldn't think twice about defending himself because he believed he had the right to. And it was important for him to, in his own words, because these things were a lie, and he wanted to prove that. And it was Yolanda that was responsible.
The evidence will show
who's in love with money would kill somebody 4 days after they were married to that person.
It would only be an imbecile. And he's not an imbecile, right? Really? And you're not obsessed with money because you've had every woman in your life give you money. It's always been about money. It just makes him look more and more guilty, in my opinion. I was watching one of these shows, it might have been Dateline, and I heard a quote from Abraham Lincoln that I had never heard before. It goes like this: "A man who is his own lawyer has a fool for a client." Think about that for a minute. They're emotional, and your emotions can get the best of you. That's why it's better to have someone else speak for you in this kind of circumstance, because you don't want to put your foot in your mouth. And you're going to see what happens when the emotions get the best of Michelle. He definitely tried to do his best to look like a professional, an innocent professional guy with the glasses on, a little preppy outfit, talking sweet and soft and kind of being patient and humanizing himself to the jury, because that's important. I don't know. There's just something about his eyes, something about the way he speaks. It's kind of condescending. I'm not buying it. Example right here of how he gets emotional, and the judge has to stop him because one of the other attorneys is objecting.
Judge, and tell him that he was being sandbagged
Because he also breaks down in tears. They could have been faked, but there he is. Oh, and he makes this statement: "Wow, this is harder than I thought it would be." Is that a true statement because he's really overwhelmed, or was he trying to appeal to the heart of the jury?
This is harder than I thought it would be.
And what's this about? He seemingly trips and falls over the podium. "Oh, Judge, I twisted my ankle."
Sorry. Twisted my ankle, Judge.
What was that? Was it theatrics? Was he trying to pull on the heartstrings of the jury? Because poor Michelle? He's up against these big-time lawyers. I think he's used to being conniving. I think he's used to being manipulative. And I think he's trying to do the same thing in the courtroom. Oh, but the best part and the most emotional aspect of Michelle defending himself was when he had to come face to face with the man from MetLife Insurance, the one that stopped him from being able to collect that $1 million. Here's what happened.
You had been married to her for 3 days before you killed her to get the life insurance. So to me, that was very clear.
Judge, give me a second because I'm going to say something that I should. Just say that again.
Objection,
It's gonna take
Mr. Soto.
all of those guys wearing white. It's going to take all of them and some more.
Michelle goes off. That's the only way I can describe it. He can't hold back because this man's unstable, he says. "Excuse me, Judge, I'm about to say something I shouldn't." Why are you even saying that to the judge? And if you're not following what he's saying here, he's basically threatening this witness, saying, "If you say that again, I'm going to attack you, and it's going to take more than all the officers in this room to protect you." I don't know how he thought that that was going to make him look as though he was innocent. Was it like, "How dare you say I killed my wife?" Well, it backfired. You're trying to get the jury to like you. You're not supposed to be showing them that you're capable of getting angry and threatening to hurt someone. But he's in contempt of court at this point, and the judge sanctioned him for this outburst in court and is not looking good for him. In order to prove that he's not this monster, that he doesn't hurt women, he decides to go ahead and bring in one of his ex-girlfriends. And this is what he asks her.
Did I ever throw anything at you?
No.
Did I ever punch you?
No.
Did I ever slap you?
No.
Did I ever throw you on the ground?
No.
He never did anything physical. Not only that, he brings Miriam onto the stand and questions her about when, says there had to be more than one person responsible for this, 2 or maybe more, and that they were both right-handed. I can follow this, I can understand where he's coming from, so I see the argument. I do think about it, and I think you'll understand. I personally think it does bring a little bit of reasonable doubt, and Michelle's DNA wasn't present on Wendy's clothing or at the scene. However, listen to what was present.
There were several of the markers where his DNA is not represented.
They actually found 2 DNA samples from 2 different men as well as a woman's DNA. That's pretty interesting. Could it point to Yolanda? Could she have conspired with someone else besides Michelle? Not only that, the defense also brings up the fact that Yolanda's not a credible witness. She's lied from the beginning. First, she said she didn't know anything. Then she says, okay, I knew of the plan, but nothing else. And now she knows all of this. She's changed her story again and again. And in the last case, I talked about how there's a race sometimes to be first to get the better deal, if Michelle was innocent. I'm just saying if he was, wouldn't it be convenient for Yolanda to rush in and make a confession that would give her immunity so that now she can pin it on someone else? Would there be a reason why Michelle would do that type of damage to Wendy? Think about it for a second. He could have easily just strangled her. She was strangled and also bludgeoned. If you're trying to get away with a murder, and you're someone like Michelle who just wants to take the money and run, would you really risk blood getting everywhere and making noise? Okay, it's a desolate warehouse area, but wouldn't it make more sense to just strangle her? Wouldn't it make more sense for someone that hated Wendy to do this? Do you think Michelle really hated Wendy because by all accounts he loved Wendy? Maybe he didn't ever love Wendy. Maybe Yolanda's telling the truth that he just targeted her, that it was all facade and he married her just to kill her. But doesn't it make more sense that someone with extreme hatred, someone like a scorned lover, would beat Wendy the way that she did to take away her beauty, to literally erase her face? Well, that's what the defense was. She hated what Wendy stood for. What did she stand for? Yolanda didn't even know her. What was it that she resembled a younger version of? Yolanda. She was the woman that your lover left you for. Wendy represented the betrayal. She wished she would just go away. To me, that is very powerful. This woman has immunity, but she hated Wendy and she wished that she would go away. And she did. There were some interesting claims and theories made about the pregnancy. You know that Wendy supposedly told her mother that she was pregnant. However, she wasn't pregnant. So why would she lie to her own mother? It doesn't seem like Wendy's that type of girl. She loved her family, and her mom and her were very close. So one of the theories is that Michelle, in order to get her to marry him as quick as he wanted because he was running out of money, he faked the pregnancy test. So you're going to say, wait, what? But it really wouldn't be that hard, would it? Just take a marker, put a little extra line. It's plausible. But on the other hand, there's another theory that Wendy was the one that wanted to get married, and so she faked the pregnancy. She told Michelle that she was pregnant in order to get him to commit. Which one do you think is more realistic? If you go with the theory that Michelle really thought she was pregnant, and that argument really did happen about her not drinking, and that argument caused all of these events to be set in place, but that instead of him carrying out this crime, there's an argument that when he went inside she left, and what happened was out of his control. Why was she wearing a party dress if they had just come from the hotel back home? Would she be driving in a party dress, or did she leave, put a party dress on to go somewhere with someone, and this ended up happening to her? I want to know what you really think. But what would she have done when there was no baby that actually arrived? So part of me really thinks that theory about Michelle being the one who faked it is more realistic to me. And then it was all part of the plan. Now, he knew what he was going to say that they got in a fight about, or was the drinking, and it would also destroy her character in some ways, making it look like this is a woman who disregarded her unborn child just to take one last dig at her, because after all, she was just a meal ticket in his eyes. The prosecution goes first, and this was very interesting. Listen to what the prosecutor says.
I can't charge her. I love to. But I can't. And she came in here, and she filled in the details. She gave you the answers to questions that you had.
You heard that right. She said she wished she could charge Yolanda, but she can't. So what's the next best thing? The same thing I said earlier. The reason they're giving her immunity is because they wanted someone to go down for this crime, and she was the first one to come forward and admit that she had something to do with it. They wish they could charge her, but they can't. So, when it came to closing arguments, Michelle, whether he was just nervous or thought that his standby attorney could maybe do a better job because he's the real professional defense attorney, he turned over the reins to his attorney. This was a 7-week trial and the criminal defense attorney is about to wrap up this case. He's attempting to give a compelling argument that puts reasonable doubt into the mind of the jurors. Because if one juror isn't convinced, then you've got to start over to take over this time. The defense's argument was mostly around not making an emotionally driven decision, that this was a court of law. They're waiting for the jury to deliberate and the family gets together. They're hugging each other, they're praying, they're hugging the prosecutor, and they're waiting. It only took 2.5 hours for the jury to come back with their verdict, but Wendy's family has been waiting years for justice, and now they're sitting in the courtroom, waiting again. You're going to watch and listen to the clerk reading the verdict.
We, the jury in Miami-Dade County, Florida, this 22nd day of April 2014, find the defendant, Michelle Escoto, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder.
Just look at his face. Guilty. Do you think his face reflects that, his mouth in a frown shape? What do you think it looks like to you? Well, to Wendy's family, it looks like justice. They're overwhelmed with emotion. They're crying, they're praying, they're feeling as though they finally had closure. But this was the sentencing hearing and the judge was about to announce Michelle's sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. After that, Michelle has the audacity to proclaim his innocence to Wendy's family.
No matter how much satisfaction this verdict has given any of you, an innocent person was convicted in this case.
Do you think that justice was served? Wendy's family doesn't think so. Do you think someone got away with murder? And that was Yolanda, one of her sisters, said. Do you think complete justice was served because Wendy's family doesn't? They think someone got away with murder, Yolanda. One of Wendy's sisters said what I echoed, that how can a mother take another mother's child away from them? They're both monsters. And the day of the sentencing, her family went to her gravesite, and they prayed and they held hands and they talked to her. There was finally closure for this family, as much as there could be.